urgency in saving democracy. Then Djene Bajalan, professor of history at Missouri State University. Why is Betsy DeVos demanding that Duke University and University of North Carolina, their Middle East Studies programs, serve U.S. national security interests? That's what's happening here? We'll talk about academic freedom, the Middle East, and touch a bit on potential crisis with Iran, even as Imran Khan, the Pakistani premier, says that Indian actions in Kashmir could set off a nuclear war in the subcontinent. But don't worry, when he's not fighting off impeachment, Trump's going to be able to negotiate that. We've got some sound for that later. Trump offered the Ukrainian president the Justice Department to help in investigating a Joe Biden conspiracy theory. Part about his son, very real, very Biden swamp. Secret servers, not so much. Acting national intelligence directors testifying before Congress as we speak. And the whistleblower who initially brought this testimony forward tentatively might come forward if they get proper protection. Lula's defense team is denied a request to include The Intercept's reporting on how the prosecution of him was corrupt and politically motivated. That sounds like a corrupt and politically motivated ruling. Even as a team of progressive legislators led by Raul Grijalva, Deb Haaland, and Ro Khanna put forward a comprehensive resolution demanding labor, indigenous, Amazonian protections, as well as the release of political prisoner Lula da Silva and a probe into the Department of Justice's role in backing the corrupt Lava Jato investigation. Inequality grew, including in the heartland, according to the latest census, even as medical costs continue to skyrocket. They've surpassed $20,000 per person this year, hitting a new record. Go team, even as Elizabeth Warren continues to be slightly Buttigieg-esque on what exactly her healthcare plan is. She gave a CFR questionnaire as well, which reinforced standard Democratic foreign policy and problems. All that and much, much more on today's Majority Report. Matt is on the road. He's waterboating himself. Sorry?
Down on the bayou.
Down on the bayou. But we've got a great, I think this triad has actually never happened before. This is exciting.
First time for everything.
Yep. The
Djene.
troika of ideology.
Wait, what is your ideology?
Just get it done.
Just get it done. New Jersey.
No bumps in the road.
No bumps in the New Jersey Jeeves.
The Klubeck ideology.
The Klubeck ideology. I relate to the Klubeck ideology. My ideology is a fusion of Mao and Klubeck.
Yeah. I'm an anarcho-communist who likes to get things done.
There's a business book called Good to Great, and it's sort of like a combination between that and the Viet Cong. That's how I describe my politics. Were you around when we did the New Jersey Jeeves bit?
I don't think so.
Okay, because we were taking because you're like, you know, you have to like deal with Sam and manage him, and we were just thinking of him being, and you like, it's all right, sir, take a frickin' breath. Jeeves, where are the tickets? It's okay, they're right here on my phone, sir. Very good, very good. And you just like manage and calm him down, and
that's part of it.
And like Jeeves, actually, basically, like essentially, what I'm trying to say is Brendan is the power behind the throne. There's a lot of like speculation about like the power dynamics and all of everything, like, you know, what's going on here. But what I'm saying is that it's not like it's Brendan.
I'm not going to
Brendan
reveal
runs,
any of
Sam.
it so that we keep people guessing. I mean, I think when people build
There's
their
a
own
Jeeves
narratives
dynamic.
as to what's happening, it keeps people engaged, and I'm all for that.
It's fun to think.
long as
of
it's
the
not
world.
too
How
salacious.
Jeeves-esque of you to say. Very good, sir. People think about their own narratives. It makes them more active in the Twitter analytics.
It's fun to think of these things in terms of your fantasy life, Michael. Just the accents people have and the things they say. It's better than real life.
It makes it so much more tolerable. My comedy versions are obviously not in Brendan's case, but certainly for a lot of the people that I do impressions of, an enhancement. In Brendan's case, it's just like some type of acid. It's like some type of like LSD PG Woodhouse parallel reality, which I find amusing.
Me too.
Still waiting on mine. You're still trying to figure out how you can pull that one off without offending anyone.
Right. I mean, look, the obvious one would. I mean, look, I could feed some of your lines through a Bernie or bust Bill filter, and that would be funny. That'd be funny. Like, we gotta broaden our horizons.
Yeah, I'm always saying that.
Gotta broaden the horizons. I know I always talk about this, but street action and union militancy, that one works.
Yeah.
All right, folks. Here's what we are gonna do. This yesterday. Jamie, you understand what's happening with Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
You were talking. I mean, it's
y'all
super
filled me
simple
in.
one, right? Yeah. You asked what was happening today, and it was like a relief because instead of being like, well, there's a private security contractor named CrowdStrike, and then they talked to a Democratic staffer 3 years ago, and then Trump, said the N-word on This Apprentice, and somehow Putin's involved, like the usual pinballs of these stories. This one's pretty straightforward.
The time when my brain shuts off.
Yes, right, exactly. This one's pretty straightforward. This one is, and then somehow that turned into Robert Mueller Tchotchke art, and we're all exhausted. This one is
Refreshingly simple.
refreshingly simple. Joe Biden's son is sits on the board of a Ukrainian energy company. That is the swamp in and of itself, but of course it's metastasized into a broader conspiracy that is not true, which includes actually literally something that Joe Biden said at a meeting of the Council on Foreign Relations while it was being taped that somehow Trump thinks is like, basically Trump thinks that Joe Biden publicly admitted to like a significant crime in Ukraine at like a Q&A at the Council on Foreign Relations. And it ties into a broader conspiracy theory about, I think another thing that's happening here is that Trump is confusing the CrowdStrike investigation with Hillary's private email server. So I'm trying to tease all of this together. But the bottom line is that he basically thinks that those Nicolas Cage movies about like the secret treasure map and the Constitution are real, except they're in Ukraine and they're going to put Joe Biden in jail. And
Lock him up. Lock him up.
That's what it is.
Lock
It's
him
just
up,
season
yeah.
2 of Lock.
It's just,
Him or her
exactly.
up.
It's just lock him up, reloaded. And so I pointed out yesterday that, what the Trump administration is going to do for their spin is they're going to say, hey, I got my buddy, the president of Ukraine, right here. Does he say that he's being threatened or asked to cooperate in our political campaign in order to get the funds that Congress already allocated for him? I don't think so. And of course, because the president of Ukraine is in the world's periphery dealing with Russian influence and does not want to piss the United States off, obviously he's not going to contradict it. And lo and behold, I believe this was this morning.
This was yesterday
or
after the show.
Yesterday after the show. Look what happened here.
President Zelensky, have you felt any pressure from President Trump to investigate Joe Biden and Hunter Biden?
I think you read everything. So I think you read text. I'm sorry, but I don't want to be involved.
Pause it. I am really sorry. I know this is obnoxious of me, but this is literally my impression coming to life.
Yeah,
this is exactly the bit we did yesterday.
Yeah, I saw it after the show. I was like, wow, Michael and Sam are the Nostradamus of 2 hours from now.
Yeah, I've been, you see what you read now. And Trump's just like, wow, what a smart cookie. I love this comedian. This guy's a former comedic actor who starred in a Ukrainian television show about a school teacher, I believe, who became president. and then leverage that popularity to become president. He's also
Oh,
Jewish.
hell yeah.
He's kind of an interesting guy, actually. I don't know enough about him, but I don't know. He might be on the pro-austerity side of things, but he's at least biography-wise, he's interesting.
I appreciate the postmodernness of that story.
Yeah, that's like hyper-normalization.
Yeah,
Seriously.
he's basically what actually happened is Adam Curtis engineered a Ukrainian coup and installed a crisis actor for his next BBC doc. Okay, let's go.
I'm sorry, but I don't want to be involved to democratic, open elections of USA. No, you
He
heard
knows the
that we
word.
had, I think, good phone call. It was normal. We spoke about many things, and so I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed me. Yes.
In other words, no pressure.
President Trump,
You know what? There was no pressure. And you know there was, and by the way, you know there was no pressure.
know
All
it.
you have to do is see it, what went on the call. But you know that. But you could ask the question, and I appreciate the answer.
Well, okay, yeah,
Wow.
that is literally.
He literally said he's having a normal one.
Yes,
Yeah.
that's exactly what he just did. Just watch the Majority Report. Just in case you want to skip a Trump press conference, we've got you a couple hours in advance.
Also, once he really gets into his answer that Trump's been waiting for, Trump does not break eye contact with him the entire time. It's just
No, Trump
It
is
was
total.
normal. We
Right.
spoke about many things, and so I think, and you read it, that nobody pushed me. Yes.
That is a sound drop waiting to happen.
Did that nobody push me is definitely a sound drop. So did I hit my lines? Yes, you did. Very good.
you
If
could
you
tell
do-
he was an actor, right?
You could
folks?
tell he wasn't an actor. He was a comedian. That's the other part of my bit is that Trump is confused with him being a stand-up and all of his bribes involved. Maybe we could get you a Netflix special. Maybe even HBO.
I'd watch that.
I would totally watch that. All right, folks. Sam loves reading ads. Watch him do something he enjoys, and then we'll be right back.
Everybody in the house.
See what I'm saying? Was this cut? Okay, guys.
Got a little B-roll here.
Little B-roll.
With new school.
Okay, cool. No, it's fine. I was just a little worried for a second. You don't want the footage where Jamie says she's actually voting for Julian.
Hey,
Castro.
support for today's shows. I'm sorry. Hey, support for today's shows comes from Carrie Uma, which marries old school design with new school ethics. They're shoes that are made responsibly. They feel crazy comfortable, and they provide effortless style. I think everybody knows here I've been trying to up my style game a little bit. I've been told for years I got to start wearing a better class of shoes and sneakers. And these guys, they make their sneakers by hand with premium natural materials. They have canvas, which is from cotton sourced via fair trade initiatives. They have a cleaner premium leather, which is made with water that's been reused and treated with zero chemical waste output. Their outsole is even made of natural raw rubber. Plus, their shipping footprint balance is zero. Offsets, folks. It's amazing. They ship worldwide and here in the U.S. as well. They even have express shipping. They can deliver your shoes in just 2 to 3 business days. And then, if for any reason they don't fit perfectly, you send them back free of charge. I'm loving these things. I have them right here, as you can see, on my feet. I got the high top, black leather. It reminds me of my youth, but they look nicer, frankly, and they're made they're more substantial, and of course, like I say, they're made more ethically. So these are great sneakers. They're super comfortable. They look good. And now for a limited time, our listeners can get an exclusive 15% off your first pair of Carrie Uma sneakers. Go to carrieuma.com/majority to get 15% off. That's CARIUMA CarIuma.com/majority. 15% off today. CarIuma.com/majority.
Very good. All right, we're going to take a brief break. We'll come right back with Cal Winslow. He's a journalist and editor, and we're going to be talking about the Harlan County strikes. Majority Report, Michael Brooks here. Joining us now is Cal Winslow. He is a labor historian. He's author of the recent piece in Jacobin Magazine, No Neutrals in Harlan County. Cal, thanks for being here.
No problem. My pleasure.
What's happening in Harlan County? Tell us about this strike.
Well, I think this strike protest might just be winding up for now, at least if what I read in the paper this morning is true, but never mind. Typically, of the eastern Kentucky coal fields and the southern coal fields in particular, the employers have been viciously harsh on their workers whenever they felt called upon to do something. And this time what they did was they just closed a couple of mines and fired the workers and didn't give them their paychecks and left them really in an isolated part of the world like eastern Kentucky, left the miners with very little option except to try to take some action, and they did by first shutting down the railroad tracks and closing off the mine from making it impossible for the mine to sell the coal that it already had out of the ground, and then constructing a camp with supporters there that lasted for more than a month now, I think, and got some attention. And for us, I guess, it also brought back to the memory the bloody story of Harlan County, which goes right back to the 1930s and before then. And that's kind of what interested me, being a historian, I guess, that in times when there's trouble and when workers are moving, it always seems that we hear about Harlan County.
Will you tell us that history, that story of the 30s and before in Harlan County?
Well, the American coal fields were organized relatively early on, and the northern fields, Pennsylvania, Ohio, across that belt, were pretty strongly organized in the 1890s when the United Mine Workers of America was founded in Columbus, Ohio. And a union, a pretty powerful union, organized on an industrial basis, that is, everybody who worked in or around the mine would be a member of the union. It was a pretty strong union, except there was the feeling that the southern fields, as they were called, southern West Virginia, eastern Kentucky, and Virginia, were always a threat to the strength of the competitive fields, because they were a big non-union. They could always be relied on to keep the supply of coal moving, and so numerous times, under numerous leaderships, there was an attempt to bring what were called the southern fields into the Union. And this happened in the 1910s, and it happened for our subject today, it happened in the 1930s, where particularly difficult times for miners, for all workers in the country. So in 1931, when 1/3 of the coal miners in Harlan County were unemployed, and many of those people had been evicted from their homes, and there was no other work in an isolated area like that, the miners struck. And it led to bloodletting on both sides, the intervention of the federal government, and a fight for a union that lasted for almost a decade.
Tell us about the song, Which Side Are You On, and how it fits.
Yeah, I wish I could sing it for you, because it's it's very moving.
Yeah.
But the sheriff of Harlan County at the time in 1931 was J.H. Blair. He was a particularly nasty fellow, I guess, but there were plenty like him. But he was involved in a raid on the home of a coal miners organizer. They came in the middle of the night, as they would, and broke up the house searching for the miner who wasn't there, and terrifying the family. So in response, Florence Reese, who was the leader's wife, wrote the song "Which Side Are You On?" and it became kind of an anthem, first of the mine workers, and then I think for the American labor movement in general. And it says, "Hey, they say in Harlan County there are no neutrals there. You'll either be a union man or a thug for J.H. Blair. Which side are you on?" And been sung at many strikes and rallies ever since.
What about the United Mine Workers as a union? Where do they sort of fit in terms of their militancy and kind of in the ideological spectrum historically?
Well, I think they shifted. They haven't always been in one particular stance, but an interesting thing about them was, to go back to what I said, they were always an industrial union, and in that sense, implicitly a challenge to the American Federation of Labor, which was based on craft unions. Now,
can you explain the difference to people?
Well, an industrial union would be, say, in an automobile plant. Mm-hmm. In an industrial union, everyone would be in the same union, one union. If craft unionism prevailed, the electricians would be in one union, the machinists in another, the janitors in another, the secretaries in another. Does that help?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yep.
So a big plant might have 20, maybe more, unions involved in representation and negotiation.
Got it.
So there's always been a movement for industrial unions in the U.S. It came mainly from the left, from the socialists on the left, going right back to the founding of the labor movement. But it came to a head in the 1930s when the United Mine Workers, led by its president then, John L. Lewis, felt that it was time, with Roosevelt administration now in office, it was time to organize the workers in American industry. And Lewis and the UMW broke from the AFL and set out to do just that. And in an incredible few years, they were able to organize workers in the automobile industry, the steel industry, the rubber industry, chemicals, farm equipment, you name it, and brought millions of workers who were deemed to be unorganizable by some because they often were immigrants or they were unskilled, brought these people into the union movement in a particularly powerful way, into the Congress of Industrial Organizations, or CIO. And so John L. Lewis, and it certainly wasn't all up to him, but at least as a symbol, John L. Lewis will forever be remembered as the person who led to the unionization of the workforce, really, in the 1930s.
And just looping it back now, because we're going to expand the conversation in the next several minutes. But basically, the federal government has agreed to spend $3.72 million to retrain Kentucky's black jewel coal miners. I have an enormous amount of skepticism about what exactly this retraining will entail and for what economy exactly. The back pay checks for the miners have been cut for those in West Virginia, but they're actually still waiting on their back pay in Kentucky and Virginia. And my understanding is that, I mean, this strike was literally about not only were they not getting back pay, I believe that they had actually taken money back out of their accounts that had already been deposited. And of course, this incredible strike happened, and it earned national attention, and Bernie Sanders came and showed solidarity and support. But it's incredibly important, but it's striking that, it's fighting for such a bare minimum in the sense of really reflecting on just the relentless war against workers and organized labor for the last several decades.
Well, you've said it as well as anyone can, I think, there. That's absolutely right, that even though led by sort of West Virginia teachers, things seem to be maybe opening up in the labor movement a bit. We're still mostly on the defensive, and people are afraid to ask for too much. And so even with all the discussion of wages not having improved really in almost decades, we hear of a good settlement being 1 or 2%, hardly keeping up with inflation. And I think that's what's going on with these workers in what's traditionally one of the very poorest parts of the country.
What do you make of this emergence, though? I mean, the West Virginia teachers also in Oklahoma and California, the Chicago strikes in 2012, great union leadership there, and once again fighting, in that case, fighting this, Democratic mayor who was one of the most, active anti-union mayors in the country, the ever odious Rahm Emanuel. We have the GM strikes happening. Looks like a little bit of a similar dynamic of GM at this point, I believe, is at $30 billion profitability, and the strikers are asking for really quite little. The company responded by cutting off people's health insurance. I guess, again, in that sort of similar dialectic of the real incredible, relentless war on workers, but at the same time, and you as a historian, you have an article coming out, which I'm incredibly excited to read, about the Seattle general strike. What's the positive end of this equation as well? I guess my question, if people are willing to take the risk to do something as extreme as a strike, when does the shift start to become of, well, yeah, we're taking this huge risk. So how about, equity in the company? How about a 30% raise, or so on?
Once again, you've said it, but I would only add that the appetite increases with the eating, that you might say, and for those of us on this side of things, we have to hope that seeing workers back in struggle, seeing people make gains, even if they're small, is going to be a lesson for other people. And it will lead them to possibly ask for more. But I think that we probably are going to need more activity before we see really important increases. On the other hand, I'm an active supporter of California Healthcare Workers Union, the National Union of Healthcare Workers. And over their past 10 years of existence, you wouldn't know that there was a problem, because they've been winning good contracts and they've been increasing benefits, and they're a democratic union and they're militant and they go on strike all the time. So, one never knows. You can't tell what can be won until you try.
Indeed. And that may be my final question. What is the difference between, you talk about a successful example like the California nurses. Now, and obviously there's some structural factors in place. We haven't even gotten into, one of Bernie Sanders' most important, genuinely revolutionary proposals would be getting rid of so-called right-to-work laws. But when you think strategically and you kind of balance somewhere between the California Nurses Union and then maybe the heads of other major unions, even sort of, helping run interference for candidates running against single-payer health care, which would seem to be one of the most kind of basic things that any union person, anybody with an interest in the middle class and working people would obviously support as a policy unequivocally. Is this also maybe like a time of reevaluation, even on the left, of, going like the ground is more willing to take risks and do radical things than the leadership typically, and starting to think more around working on that revitalization instead of maybe, and, forgive me, but, maybe folks who've, put in some really important work, but are also kind of, used to being the Washington Generals to some extent for the last couple of decades.
Well, I think a very strong argument can be made that the most important changes have come about not just in society, but also in the labor movement itself, that they've come about as a result of movements from the bottom up.
Yep.
We might say. So to go back to Harlan County, really, that era symbolically began, in a sense, with these obscure coal miners in eastern Kentucky who had just had enough. And then, going back to what I said about John L. Lewis and the movement that began at the time of Roosevelt's election, what happened was coal miners apparently heard of the new administration in Washington and got the idea that President Roosevelt wanted them to join a union, and started flocking into their union headquarters literally by the thousands, so that there were reports from union officers and organizers saying they couldn't keep up with the number of people who wanted to be in a union. And it was that, it seems to me, that said to John L. Lewis and the others, hey, we can do something, but also, looking back at that period of time, we better do something, because along with everything else, and I don't know that Bernie Sanders fits right into this picture, but people are starting to think of different ways of going about things, doing things, and that includes workers today, if you see what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
So I think that you're absolutely right, and we need to really keep an eye on what's going on with the rank and file workers, and especially at a time, I shouldn't end up with this, but a time when the ordinary General Motors workers are trying to run a strike when their leaders are trying to stay out of jail.
Well, there you go. I think you distilled it. I guess I have to say I'm more charmed by those ones than the centrist wonk ones. At least there's some fun to it. But Cal Winslow, I really appreciate your time. People, read this great piece, No Neutrals in Harlan County, and look forward to a forthcoming piece in the Monthly Review Press about Seattle's general strike. And I'll just say, I mean, in addition to it being a fascinating piece of history, it was a major point in sort of, basically radicalizing America's oligarch class because they were so terrified of what was possible. Cal Winslow, I really appreciate your time.
I appreciate being involved in the discussion, and so thanks very much, and keep up the good work.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much. Take care. All right, folks. We're just going to take a brief break and come right back with Djene Bajalan. Welcome back to the Majority Report. Michael Brooks here, joining us now, the second player in our doubleheader, Djene Bajalan. He's a professor of history at Missouri State University. You can find his writing in outlets like The Jacobin. You can find him regularly on TMBS. He's fresh off of the Chicago TMBS live show, in fact. Djene, how you doing?
I'm doing great, Michael. It's great to speak to you today.
Thank you so much. So, a lot of conversations about censorship, about this and that. I have no problem, actually. I think some of the criticisms of a sort of culture of censorship isn't the right word, but kind of control and constant kind of monitoring is correct. And I do think that there does need to be a sort of commitment to openness in some respects, openness in all senses. But, the right makes a lot of hay out of this stuff. And then when there's like a actual literal threat, not a cultural or stylistic conversation, you're speaking about the human rights of Palestinians, we're going to cut your funding, maybe even fire you. That is the only time that actual academic freedom is threatened in this country. And that takes us to the extraordinary thing happening at Duke, and I believe also UNC, and Betsy DeVos and the Department of Education. Djene, what's going on?
Well, there has been a letter published in the Federal Register basically criticizing the Middle East Studies program that is run jointly by Duke University and the University of North Carolina in Chapel Hill. It's not a particularly big Middle Eastern Studies program, but it's obviously fairly prestigious. Duke is a well-known university. UNC Chapel Hill is a very prestigious university as well. And this letter has basically been criticized in quite chilling terms the activities of the Middle East Studies program there, accusing them of bias and so on and so forth. And this really hits a number of different points related to the sort of the broader debate taking place in the United States pertaining to campus freedom. So, as you mentioned in the lead-in, there's a lot of complaints that students are, refusing to listen to alternative perspectives, and your friends in the intellectual dark web make careers basically complaining about how their freedom of speech is being sort of stifled.
Even as they a lot of constantly talk. I'm going to take to the New York Times to talk about how I can't talk.
Yeah, and this this is obviously kind of a little bit bizarre given the fact that these individuals usually have very large platforms. And of course, we have seen perhaps excesses in very small cases or in very marginal cases in sort of particular institutions. People focus on Oberlin, and I think it's Evergreen, and some of the University of California systems where things perhaps have got out of control or people have acted in an irresponsible way. But there are thousands of universities in America, and individuals on the political right often come to speak in these places, and with very little problem. And if there are protests, they're usually civilized and within these sort of realms of respectability. But yet we have this kind of discourse that people on the right are kind of being persecuted in universities. Now, what we've seen here, though, in this case, is the full power of the American government, being sort of deployed to threaten the Middle Eastern Studies program, which receives federal funding. There's a Title IX program, which they have in the United States, which is designed to capacity build, train people up in languages, prepare people for sort of careers in government, careers in business, and also careers in education. And so we had this letter. What triggered this whole event was an event held by the Middle East Center in Duke and Chapel Hill, in which there was a discussion of Gaza. And it included individuals, obviously from Gaza, who discussed the impacts of the Israeli blockade on that region. And it also included people from, respectable think tanks in Washington and so on and so forth. But this provoked a local Republican congressman from Raleigh to forward a complaint based on sort of the assumption or the sort of accusation that this had been an anti-Semitic debate, and people were engaging in all kinds of anti-Israeli and anti-Semitic tropes against against Israel. And this is the sort of classic conflation of criticism of Israel and anti-Semitism, often deployed by the political right to confuse that issue. But, people, this individual had not, for example, this congressman hadn't attended the event and was basically going off sort of secondhand information. Now, sort of reports about that particular event, that makes the point that, there were a diversity of opinions. But the problem is, increasingly, the politicians are critical of sort of anything which perhaps doesn't immediately.
So wait, how does the Department of Education? So this is disturbing and problematic, but and typical. Everybody, in fact, I think especially as we actually start to see some resurgence of anti-Semitism in the United States, including terrorism aimed at the Jewish community. The fact that people who just defend Israel's conduct anytime, anywhere, any place, from occupation to the, indiscriminate killing of civilians, and the fact that they've said any discussion of a sovereign nation state's policies is anti-Semitic, they've done an incredible amount of work to turn one of the greatest poisons in human history into a joke, frankly. At least until quite recently. Moving forward, I think that, so that this letter gets the Department of Education now, if I understand correctly, is actually threatening funding?
Yeah, that's right. So there's this Title IX funding, which has certain strings attached. And this has always been the case. And it sort of comes out of this Cold War tradition of area studies where, there was sort of a need for specialist knowledge on various regions of the world during the Cold War. And, basically the Department of Education is making the claim based on very little evidence. It doesn't actually cite much evidence except for example, the titles of particular classes, or the doesn't look at the content or types of or the names of conferences that we're giving at the university, to make the claim that the university is not using the money appropriately. It isn't sort of training people to go into government. It makes accusations that it's actually quite ironic. They accusing them of not sort of funneling people into government careers, which is bizarre given the fact that there's no career counselor at that program. And are they trying to sort of dictate how people should, use their education, and do they have to go to a particular labor quota in the State Department or the military if they learn a foreign language? So there's all these accusations. They accuse the program of doing esoteric topics which aren't really related to the national security of the United States, which they claim is the sort of function of these Title IX grants. And this is, there is a certain element of truth to that, but, the language on these grants are pretty broad, and they talk about building cultural competence.
Right.
And of course that means sort of delving into deeper cultural issues. So one of the things that they highlight in the letter is a conference on Iranian cinema, which they don't see as having a relevance to American sort of national security interests. But if we're trying to build up cultural competence about a Middle Eastern culture, then it is a very relevant topic. Right. The fundamental problem is that these individuals don't have any competence to make these judgments. There's a very good example of this in the letter. It complains that, Islam is being shown in too positive a light, or is being focused on too much, which is deeply problematic and straight up Islamophobic. But it also talks about the lack of focus on Middle Eastern religious minorities. And one of the religious minorities that they mention is the Kurds, who are not a religious minority. Kurds are Muslim, Sunni Muslim, part of the sort of majority of the Islamic world, which just demonstrates the complete ignorance of the people writing this letter. It just comes straight out of sort of an Islamophobic approach.
Could be plucked from a Harris book. I'm moving forward. I mean, we'll loop back to this, and this is a bigger problem, but I do want to touch on a couple of other issues, actually emerging from the corollary of this mindset, but even in obviously a far more dangerous fashion. What do you read as the last couple of days' state of play with Iran? I mean, a lot of us breathed a sigh of relief and laughed when John Bolton was humiliated by Donald Trump. That was good for a couple of hours. But it still seems, I mean, you basically have an administration almost saying, happily that they're sort of a security subcontractor of Saudi Arabia. Certainly how Saudi Arabia moves. The Saudis, so these jokes about the Saudis will, they'll fight till every last Pakistani soldier or Sudanese soldier is killed for them. What is happening in the last couple of days? At the same time, I mean, Iran is certainly winning the kind of global public relations war because at least in this instance, they're right. I mean, they are right about who destroyed the agreement, the JCPOA. They're right about, many aspects of their critique of, the genocidal U.S.-Saudi war in Yemen.
Yeah, I mean, this is kind of like an escalating game of chicken where, parody becomes reality. I think there was a couple of months ago, there was an article in The Onion in which John Bolton was saying an attack on Saudi Arabia is an attack on every American or something like that.
Right.
And then we come to a position where basically the administration is putting forward this discourse. You have people like Pompeo, you have Trump sort of really pushing this sort of narrative that an attack on the Saudi oil infrastructure is an attack on American national security interests. And it's deeply concerning. I mean, obviously, there's been a lot of play within the security establishment in the United States. The Saudis saying that the Houthis who claimed this attack did not actually do it, and it was an Iranian attack. The Saudis brought, for example, bits of the drone onto Saudi television. And, experts on sort of drone warfare say, well, yeah, it's possible that this is an Iranian drone, but it could also be one of the drones that is built by the Yemenis with the support of the Iranians. And sort of the whole idea that, well, the drones came from the north, security experts again said you can drive drones up and down in different directions, make them hover. So, it's still very unclear. Even though the governments are, the United States and Saudi Arabia are sort of claiming the Iranians did this, it's still, very difficult to say. And I personally do not necessarily believe that this Iranians were behind it. And, of course, if the Houthis did it, they did it with Iranian technical expertise and Iranian support in a kind of general sense. But if we go down the path of weapons supplied to one group, if that group attacks somebody, then the country that supplied the weapons is to blame. That's perhaps a path that Saudi Arabia doesn't necessarily want to go down, given the people that they have supplied military support to in the past. And more generally, from the Saudi perspective, blaming the Iranians kind of covers up the complete failure of their military adventure in in Yemen. They have pumped millions and millions into warfare there. The country's on the edge of starvation, and yet the Houthis are able to strike and, seriously damage the Saudi economy.
And by the way, in a way that's legitimate by any understanding of just basic international law. I mean, the Saudis are waging a genocidal mass killing campaign. They're bombing hospitals, they're bombing schools, they're bombing children. They've led to cholera outbreaks. There are countries on the edge of starvation. All of that bloodshed is in the Saudis' hands, and it's entirely legitimate of a ground force to resist a foreign invader. I mean, I'm sorry.
Further note,
it's reality.
I would note that the Houthis. Yeah. The Houthis, since this sort of attack, since this attack took place, the Houthis have declared that they won't launch further attacks on Saudi territory. But it is, let's say, a little bit strange to sort of imagine, that you can attack a country and then not expect anything to come back to you. I mean, right. Yemen is right next to Saudi Arabia. Of course, if you're going to go to war with one of your neighbors, expect that there will be strikes back on your territory. It's the nature of warfare. As you say, this is hardly unexpected. And, whether or not one supports any particular side in this seems an entirely sort of normal consequence of the war that's taking place. So, the Saudis I think their desire to blame Iran is, to a certain extent, a function of the fact that this is a huge humiliation for them in military terms. Obviously, their military, although well armed and has a lot of money behind it, is not anywhere near as effective as they would like to present it to the international community.
Final couple of minutes. I just want to touch a little bit on Kashmir. Imran Khan has stated now several times that India's, incredibly aggressive moves in Kashmir, which should be, a lot of it's interpreted domestically, obviously, which is that the BJP, Narendra Modi government has torn up the Indian constitution. They're going in and waging an aggressive human rights assault in Kashmir, which already was, by many estimates, the most militarized zone on earth. There's been a tech blackout. There's been, children that have been blinded by rubber bullets. There's family separations. There's detentions. Even local moderate political leaders have been put in jail. And there's multiple interpretations of this. One part of it is there is obviously, the extreme far-right nationalist project, the Hindutva project of Modi and the BJP. And, we go back to Modi and the Gujarat pogroms and mass murders and mass rapes of 2002. So this stuff is already, quite on the public record for anybody who bothers to look it up. But how does this fit with Pakistani concerns? In Pakistan, obviously, Pakistan has certainly supported groups that engage in terrorism in India, including, the Oberoi Hotel atrocities in 2008. But there is, the point is that there's a dimension of Kashmir that it's an atrocity and a problem in and of itself. But this really is the place, even more so than the Korean Peninsula, where the worst thing imaginable could actually happen. So, where are we at?
The problems with India and Pakistan, of course, go back to the partition of the subcontinent in the late 1940s, and sort of Kashmir was one of those flashpoints, one of those areas which conflict between whether this should be part of India or Pakistan it emerged in violence. It was a Muslim majority province, which was ruled by a Hindu prince, and according to the sort of partition scheme in those provinces which the British had allowed to be ruled by indigenous monarchs, the princely states, the princes were allowed to decide which country their province would go into. So of course you have a situation where the Kashmiri monarch brings Kashmir with its Muslim majority into India, and so this becomes a sort of bitter bone of contention between India and Pakistan. For example, Hyderabad, which was another princely state in India, was ruled by a Muslim monarch. When the Muslim monarch chose to be part of Pakistan, the province was occupied by India. So there's a sort of long, rancorous history going back to the sort of partition era. And this, of course, is made all the more dangerous because both India and Pakistan are nuclear armed powers. So we have in the 60s and 70s, ongoing conflict, low-scale conflict. And of course, the people who get stuck in the middle of this are the Kashmiri population. And it strikes me that, sort of more generally speaking, this assault by Modi on the Kashmiri population is an attempt in many ways to kind of bring about a final solution to the province, to the issue of Kashmir, by opening it up to sort of Indian settlement and diluting the Muslim population.
It's like Tibet or Puerto Rico. It's gentrification and population displacement. Yeah.
Yeah, this seems what the plan is. And of course, in an international environment where there isn't even any pretense of sort of a respect for human rights, this becomes possible. Under a President Hillary Clinton, Modi might not have been so willing to make that that leap to sort of escalate this conflict, because what's the comeback?
Well, however,
what
I think it
would
should be noted, right, that you do have. I mean, Modi was just in the United States. He did a big event in Houston with Trump. He met with Steny Hoyer. He met with mainline Democrats, and of the presidential candidates, as is the case, Bernie's spoken clearly and bravely on it. The other main contenders have had nothing to say, and then obviously Gabbard echoed the talking points of the RSS, which is the paramilitary organization that sort of oversees all of the ideological direction of the extreme variant in India, led by Modi. And I'll add, and I always struggle with it, but I mean, look at what Indonesia's doing in West Papua. I mean, this is definitely a global dynamic right now.
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing it with Erdogan attempting to sort of push 2-3 million Syrians into occupy Rojava and put 2-3 million Syrian Arabs there in order to dilute the Kurdish population there. We're seeing, as you mentioned, people don't talk about the brutalities taking place in Western Papua. And of course, Kashmir is again part of this sort of newly aggressive nationalism, which is really taking hold. As sort of the pretense of liberal internationalism breaks down, I think we're going to be seeing more and more of these kind of events as governments move without any fear of sort of international condemnation, move to sort of resolve these long-standing ethnic and religious conflicts in the most brutal way possible. And in India's case, Imran Khan, speaking on MSNBC today, he made the point that for many countries, India is a market of 1.2 billion people. So, criticizing India has an economic cost to it as well.
Well, and we can add, of course, the just absolutely horrifying footage and stories emerging of, China's, let's say, I mean, there's certainly deaths, but the detaining of Uyghurs is really essentially, I mean, it's cultural cleansing. The idea that we won't necessarily kill everybody, although some of that is taking place, but we are going to, strip you of what you are in an aggressive, horrifying manner. And of course, China, that's even beyond just a powerful emerging market like, India. I mean, China already, arguably we already are really in the G2 world. So, yeah.
So, yeah, it's very disturbing. And I think this isn't caused by the election of Trump. Or the ascendancy of the right wing in the United States, but it's certainly intensified by it and facilitated by it. So I think this is a very disturbing trend, and this is why, for example, the difference between Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders on foreign policy is extremely critical to highlight. There's a lot made about how different they are on domestic policy, but it's the foreign policy dimension that really there's a very serious difference there, and a Sanders presidency we might hope, sort of help arrest some of the more sort of extreme manifestations of this intensification of violence and ethnic and religious conflict.
Djene Bajalan, from your lips to Allah's ears. I appreciate your time as always, professor of history at Missouri State University. Thanks so much, Djene.
Thank you so much. Take care.
Man. All right, folks. Become a member of the Majority Report today, majority.fm/become a member. That's how this whole thing happens. Bless you, Jamie. Check out Literary Hangover with the waterboat man himself, the literary scholar, the bon vivant, Matt Leck. Check out the Michael Brooks Show, patreon.com/TMBS to get the whole thing. Michael Brooks Show on YouTube. Buy your tickets today for the Philadelphia live show November 23rd with Artesia Balthrop, Emma Vigeland, and Crystal Ball. We're very excited to see you there. And I will also be putting out information soon on an event that I'm emceeing for Lauren Ashcroft, who is running for Congress. I believe that's on October 6th. I'll have more details forthcoming. Grab your tickets to Philly today. Become a patron today. Subscribe to YouTube today. Jamie, what's cooking?
Out now on the Antifada. We have an interview with Aaron Bastani from Novara Media about his new book, fully automated luxury communism, which is named after a meme that I believe he started, or at least he likes to take the credit for it. It was a very good conversation, if I do say so myself. We brought up some of the critiques that people have made of his ideas, as well as just like what he means when he says fully automated luxury communism. And that's out now. We also have a bonus coming out on Friday for our patrons that is taken from a conversation that Andy had with our friend Corey Pine this week, actually, on Corey's show, wherein they talk about Tom DeLonge's To the Stars Academy, the Navy acknowledging the existence of UFOs, and of course, the topic of Andy's forthcoming book, Passadism. So that'll be out on Friday, which is tomorrow for our patrons.
Has
And,
Andy fully embraced it at this point?
I mean, like, does he believe in it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, no, I mean, I think he's pretty skeptical of
Nope.
everything.
Nope.
But,
Nope. He's merged with his subject.
yeah, okay. Maybe
Andy's
he
merged with
he
his
went native
subject.
with the Possadists.
He's
like
merged
Howard
with his
Kurtz.
subject. Yep.
The aliens, the space comrades. Yeah, I mean, he was kind of babbling about it the other day in a way that concerned me. So maybe you're right. Yeah, but also if you want to see him do that live in person, you can come to our live show at Littlefield it's 2 weeks from now. Holy crap. And we're doing that with Pod Damn America, as well as some really awesome guests, including Matt Chrisman, Virgil Texas, Simone Norman, Leslie Lee III from Struggle Session. Oh my God. And a subversive drag performance from Comrade Barbie. It's going to be great, folks.
Very cool. That is jam-packed. Awesome. All right,
very
folks.
excited.
We're going to see you in the postgame. No, on the fun half. This is not TMBS. I'm sorry.
My first post-coital scene with a woman. I'm hoping to add more moves to my repertoire. All I have is the dip and the swirl.
Fine, we can double dip.
Yes, this is a perfect moment.
No.
Wait, what?
You make under $1 million a year. You're scum. You're nothing.
Excuse me? Fuck you, you fucking liberal elite. I think you belong in jail.
Thank you for saying that, Sam. You're a horrible, despicable person.
All right, gonna take a quick break. I want to take a moment to talk to some of the libertarians out there. Take whatever vehicle you want to drive to the library. What you're talking about is jibber jabber.
Classic. I'm feeling more chill already.
Good. Donald Trump can kiss all of our asses.
Hey, Sam. Hey, Andy. You guys ready to do some evil?
Hitler was such an idiot.
I think I might be a Nazi.
Agreed.
No.
Death to America.
You.
Yes.
Wow.
Wow, that's weird. No way! Unbelievable. This guy's got a really good hook.
Throw our hands up.
Ooh. Wow.
But Sam, I gotta get off.
No worries. Let's. I want to just flesh this out a little bit. I mean, look, it's a free speech issue. If you don't like me,
Hey, shut up!
Thank you for calling into the Majority Report. Sam will be with you shortly.
Welcome to the fun half, folks. We are here. Let's do some sound. So there'll be a lot more of this tomorrow, obviously, because I believe this testimony is happening now. Joseph McGuire, who's the National Intelligence Director, basically is testifying today. And, essentially what he's saying is that the Trump administration put out the transcript of this call. And so, therefore, I am going to speak freely on it. I don't know, Joseph McGuire is not a figure I'm particularly familiar with. I don't know about this institutional, sort of machinations of this. I will just caution in general, and this has dissipated a bit, but in the beginning, there was a huge amount of, very active fantasy life about the intelligence apparatus saving us from Donald Trump. And I would, point everybody to reporting that, Donald Trump went to CIA headquarters in the beginning of his administration, very early on. He gave an extraordinarily bizarre speech, and everybody thought it was funny. And, some resistance people went really overboard and sort of, a lot of CIA jokes will save us. CIA will save us jokes and memes and sincere, gnashing of teeth. And actually what happened after the bizarre speech was that pretty much Donald Trump told them, like, anything. Like, there were no, the gardening gloves that you had on are off. You can do whatever you want with drones and so on. So, we've seen him. The intelligence and the defense apparatus is extraordinarily happy under Donald Trump. So that is important to remember, even if some people are, individually or even institutionally concerned about how erratic he is and so on. So I do want to sort of caution that. I don't know what the machinations are, but apparently Director McGuire has basically said, look, I'm going to say, what I have to say. So we'll see how this testimony plays out. Here's his opening statement.
August 26th, the Inspector General forwarded a complaint to me from an employee in the intelligence community. The Inspector General stated that the complaint raised an urgent concern, a legally defined term under Whistleblower Protection Act that has been discussed at length in our letters to the committee on September 16 and 17. Before I turn to the discussion about whether the complaint meets the definition of urgent concern, I first want to talk about an even more fundamental issue. Upon reviewing the complaint, we were immediately struck by the fact that many of the allegations of the complaint are based on a conversation between the president and another foreign leader. Such calls are typically subject to executive privilege. As a result, we consulted with the White House counsel's office, and we're advised that much of the information in the complaint was, in fact, subject to executive privilege, a privilege that I do not have the authority to waive. Because of that, we were unable to immediately share the details of the complaint with this committee, but continued to consult with the White House counsels in an effort to do so. Yesterday, the President released the transcripts of the call in question, and therefore, we are now able to disclose the details of both complaint and the Inspector General's letter transmitting to us. As a result, I have provided the House and Senate Intelligence Committees with the full, unredacted complaint, as well as the Inspector General's letter.
All right, so there you have it. We'll see how it plays. We're still getting a lot of complaints about YouTube, so I guess just keep me posted.
Yeah, it says it's rolling on YouTube, guys. I'm not sure what's happening right now. It's something on YouTube's end, and we're dealing with it.
Yeah, guys, we appreciate it, but we'll take care of it to the extent we can. Right-wing Mandela effect. Was watching Pacman's live stream on impeachment the other day, and he kept imploring people to support his channel. He was very convincing, so I finally pulled the trigger and became an MR member. Okay. Just wanted to give him some credit. Keep up the fantastic work. Left his best, Lula Livre. Okay. Got to support independent media across the board. Ukraine is a country, not a glorified IR thought experiment. Okay. I don't know what that is in response to, but okay. I agree. Black Marxist. Warren is losing to Trump is the worst scenario because I'll take establishment, Harris or Biden over her. Well, I understand, actually. That's going to trigger a lot of people, but I understand. I don't agree with it, but I understand what you're saying. Although I will say this. I'm going to continue to point out vital policy differences that exist because they're huge and massive, and Bernie Sanders is an unparalleled opportunity. And I think it's very clear there's people who are able to say, I have a different opinion of Elizabeth Warren, but I acknowledge reality when it comes to like Venezuela policy or housing policy or healthcare or other really vital differences. But folks that just demand no criticism, that bridge is never going to be crossed. And I will just say, don't make it so it's impossible for me to vote for Elizabeth Warren, to turn the phrase that I hear a lot. People feel so comfortable having so many double standards about Sanders and his supporters and, throwing the most insane lies and nonsense around. It might become turnabout as fair play. I will say, the more I contemplate the bizarre hatred of Sanders that comes, not from the people who would, like, the corporate establishment, but from people who claim to be, progressive or whatever, start to wonder how much of this is really deep-seated anti-Semitism. I mean, there is a lot of talk about how much he yells.
Yeah, well.
But at any rate, so just don't make it impossible for me. That's all I'm saying.
To be fair, these people do exist on both sides. We've both seen it. It's also not helping when Bernie people are so hypersensitive that they can't entertain any criticisms of Bernie whatsoever, even the valid ones. And I say that as a total Bernie bitch.
I'm willing to entertain. Here's like the actual problem with Bernie Sanders criticisms that I see. So
everyone just needs to shut up.
Actually, honestly, to some extent, yes. If you're serious about winning an election, and I make no bones about that, that is partially true. It's not a time to nitpick. But also, like, one line that I'm sorry, like, all student debt versus no student debt, medical debt or not. These are not just like, oh, don't say that there's a big difference. Like, yeah, there is. There's like millions of people.
Well, that's not what I'm talking about.
Well, okay. And then there's criticism that is either like so ridiculous and pedantic that we would not want to apply to anybody, right? I'm not going to say like, oh, well, I'm going to do like a 3-hour segment because I don't like the tone that Joe Biden used when he answered a question. That's like a lot of the stuff that I hear about Sanders. Or it's like, and I'm sorry, I don't want to, I'll just say it and, you can respond. But like some of the other stuff is just like, yes, like Bernie Sanders is not advocating a simultaneous worldwide revolution to end capitalism and
that's create. That's not what I'm talking about either.
No, but that's most of the criticisms is like Bernie is not demanding a worldwide vegan compound. So we have a problem. Like the truth of the matter is if you are on the left, this presidential campaign is putting more on the table than anybody has ever even come remotely close to doing on every major issue. And, look, I can say I wish Bernie would go further in following the Portugal model on drug decriminalization. That's fine. But I'm going to say that like 1 out of 1,000 things that I say because I'm going to unequivocally support the person who would by far increase the lives of most human beings the most. And I'm, and honestly, from like a media branding and game playing perspective, it would be better to just like throw in silly jabs and stuff. But I'm not doing that because I actually take this stuff really seriously across the board. And, the reality is Green New Deal, rent control, all medical debt relief. The only person who's clear on single payer, the only person who's clear on freeing Lula, the only person who will talk about using Israeli, foreign aid against Israel. I mean, I'm sorry. It's just like, we got to be real here.
So
it's an election.
What you're saying is there are no good faith criticisms of Bernie Sanders, so everyone should just shut up.
That was not a good faith representation of what I'm saying, but no, there's occasionally, well, it depends.
I was just talking to a black guy the other day who thinks that Warren is better at talking about race, and
yeah, I don't think that's good faith.
That's possible. I don't think that's possibly true.
Everybody needs to read the new Adolph Reed piece in the New Republic. I have increasingly less time for those arguments, and I also don't know what like I can assess on policy, like because to me the other problem with that sort of thing is like talking about race in a certain sense. Like Bill Clinton's better at talking about
Well,
race.
she also came out in favor of reparations
No,
before
but she
he
doesn't
did.
support reparations. That's another thing that I can't deal with. She does not. If you go into the specifics of what there's one candidate that supports reparations. That's Marianne Williamson. So if that's what you're voting on, vote for her. Elizabeth Warren, just like Barack Obama said, although he said he opposed, but in this context, just like Kamala Harris, she's actually proposing policies that would be economic restitution across the board, but because it disproportionately affects African Americans, she's saying it's reparations. It's dishonest. So that's actually disgusting. And then on a just broader level of like talking about race, like Bill Clinton, people remember his racism, correctly so, but there were certainly other areas in terms of like fluency on history, literature, and culture that Bill Clinton is far superior to Elizabeth Warren or Bernie Sanders. Bill Bradley spoke better about race than a lot of these people. Speaking is not policy and enacting.
Look, I'm not saying that these criticisms are correct.
They're not.
Obviously,
So
I
we
think
don't
that
have
Bernie
to-
is the best candidate, but I don't think that they're all being made in bad faith, and some of them are totally fair questions for people to be asking, and we should be willing to respond.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing is that, right, but a lot of them have been answered tens of thousands of times. So when some people,
Oh my God.
No, it's true though.
You're kind of proving my point right now.
No, you're proving my point. What's new that you've heard that hasn't been it's again, because you're not saying anything that has anything to do with anything policy or concrete. It's just like, yes, I know there's a narrative that's been pushed very aggressively about some of these things for a very long time. They've been addressed to the extent they're going to be addressed, and some combination of really good policies being put forward and the fact that literally nobody is perfect. If I was writing a script, like if the world was just a screenplay I was writing, Bernie Sanders would be running for president. He would support BDS and a one-state solution. He would be a 48-year-old, like biracial lesbian, and would have worked for Lula at some point. But we're not playing Dungeons and Dragons. We're not writing screenplays. We have to work with what is. And the vast, huge, disproportionate majority of criticism is either bad faith or just not well-founded. And I have to say, like, when I've had conversations, including like, people like Bill Fletcher Jr., who who have actually marshaled really smart criticisms, particularly in the context of like 2016, it's either like, well, in his case, he knows everything. So it would be like, yes, there's been some improvement. And then he has like a concern about age writ large, but that's unbridgeable. And then there's, in other conversations I've had with folks, they're like, oh, I didn't know that Bernie had a proposal to cut the prison population in half, abolish the death penalty. I didn't know that, he's more clear and unequivocal about these issues than anybody else. So, maybe I didn't like his facial expression that he gave during a TV answer, but that's actually good to know. So I'm, look, I'm sorry. And it would be, honestly, it would be more politic for me to, play more of those games, but the stakes are too high.
Well,
so I won't
think it would
do
be
it.
more politic for Bernie as well. And that's the main thing.
Not them.
We all care about.
Well, they all
right
do
now.
that.
Like Bernie
They do
needs
it.
to take a lot of Warren voters in order to win, despite the fact that he's also going to pick up a lot of people who don't normally vote, hopefully, but that's a less sure thing.
I would say at this point,
there are plenty of
Warren voters. Well, then Warren's
and
going to
it's
need to
not
pick
just
up some Sanders
it's not just
voters.
rich people, right? There's plenty of like nice teacher ladies or whoever who just think that Warren is going to be able to get more done, or they don't really see the difference between them
Well,
on
that's the
policy,
whole
and they
other
want
argument.
a woman. So like these are all good faith critiques that we need to be willing to respond to. That's all that I'm saying.
Well, they've all been,
And not
except
be
for the last
dismissive.
one. Well, I'll be dismissive of people who've already had the answers, who
Because
are
if we're
still saying the
dismissive,
same
whether
thing.
or not we're right, whether or not we're correct to just say that we're right and you're wrong, like it's not going to help. I really don't think it's going to
Okay.
help. And there are all kinds of. I feel like we're not gonna come to an agreement.
I
on
mean,
this.
it's just because all we're doing is just like we've already done this for years. So at this point, when we play that game, we're just indulging so much dishonesty and double standards. But I mean,
there are all kinds of double standards. It's not fair.
Yeah, so
it's
I'm not,
absolutely not fair, but
right,
we
so I'm not
want to
gonna
win.
indulge it. I think pretty clearly the strategy of letting false equivalencies be made and not drawing any differences is not working. And so they're gut, and it's actually because we're at a point now that if Bernie says at a debate, Senator Warren is a friend and colleague of mine, and I respect her, which he clearly does and should, and we have a disagreement about single payer, there's going to be a meltdown on social media saying that Bernie said that women's voting rights should be stripped.
That's not what I was saying.
But that's what a vast majority of this stuff is. So that's what I'm going to respond to. When people are, and I see like so much, mishigas about this, but it's like, I'm sorry, guys. Like, if we just see things a little bit clearly, that's the dynamic that's playing out. And I also would say that as somebody who actually takes beating Trump really seriously, it's not advantageous to, it's atrophied muscles if one candidate gets nothing but passes and the other one gets nothing but, fastballs the whole time, if they do end up getting the nomination. But
I got some good
yeah,
news
go ahead,
that can bring us all together.
Tell me.
We're live again on YouTube.
We were not live that whole time?
No, there was about a 5-minute window there where we weren't live as a result of something on YouTube's end. It said we were streaming on our end the whole time. So apologies to our viewers on YouTube. I hope you're okay.
I'm sure that me and Michael will argue again about how defensive we should or should not be of our King Bernie. So don't worry.
I mean, sure. It's not, but I mean, it's like, I guess if we broaden this though, Jamie, because this actually is relevant, and you met somebody and they said, well, I think communism is terrible because I read the Black Book of Communism and I read half of the Communist Manifesto.
I'd be like, that's a fair critique.
Absolutely. And then you had a conversation with them and you gave them some resources and they had it. And then you realized you looked at this person and they were saying the exact same thing to you to the 55th time. You might start to say, maybe this person actually just has an agenda that I'm not going to indulge.
Sure. But I don't think that's every critique that
it's
people
not
make
every
of Bernie.
critique, but it's functionally 99%. Like, I don't look when I hear, and this is funny because it goes back to like Bernie, when he first dealt with Black Lives Matter, was not doing a good job. And I said it contemporaneously. I have no problem doing it. Bernie should call for the decriminalization of all drugs, 100%. But a vast, infinite, horrifying majority of what I hear now from both professional and supporters is just like nonsense and actually like deeply unethical and profoundly dishonest. And I'm not here for it. Sorry. That's it.
Don't criticize the king.
Criticize the king when it's an actual criticism, but if it's a fantasy or a lie, then you're gonna get some pushback. and by the way, that's politics. Like,
maybe I just have more experience from being a communist, from having people tell me constantly that my ideas are totally unrealistic.
Absolutely.
So I'm just like used to it by now. I
don't think you don't take when people say that particularly well either. In fact, you're calling from a 443 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? 443. Hung up. Bad job. Not good. You're calling from a 909 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Oh, what's up? This is Darius from Cali.
Sorry, can you tell me your name again?
Darius.
Oh, Darius from California?
Yeah.
Hey, how you doing? What's on your mind?
Doing all right. So I'm calling in because a few months ago I saw a post on Twitter from Vic about that Proud Boy nonsense in the West Coast. And so
I'm
one of the tweets that I thought it was pretty interesting.
Oh, from Vic Berger?
I'm sorry? Yeah.
Okay. Okay,
Yeah, so
Vic Berger, yes. Yes.
Yeah, so I saw a tweet going around that there was I guess one of the Proud Boy leaders was bragging that they were there to intentionally cause basically like chaos and to drive up basically their taxes for all the police that were hired.
Right.
And Vic suggested that perhaps we should go after these guys by having the city sue them. So I was kind of taken aback at it because I'm thinking, well, if they start this precedent of like going after so-called leaders of groups that have to have police presence, wouldn't just like right-wing mayors in several cities just do that to any left-wing movement, like say Black Lives Matter or anything like that? Because
yeah, of course they will. Yes,
if we go down
definitely.
the precedent of like suing basically community people who are starting protests, well, that's just opening the floodgates. And yeah, I just don't agree with that. I was wondering what your thoughts on it.
Yeah, I don't agree with that either. But I would look more deeply at I mean, there's legislation across the states that Republican legislators have already passed with basically to target protesters. There's really horrifying laws. Yeah, exactly. So no, I think anything in that road is super problematic. I agree with you. Thanks for the call, man. Let's see, take more calls. 971. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, how's it going, Michael?
Good. How are you?
Hello?
What's your name? Where are you calling from?
My name is Paul. I'm calling from Southern Oregon.
What's going on?
Not a mooch. I've been trying to get on for months.
Well,
This is
here
pretty
you are.
awesome.
What do you have in your mind?
I kind of want to talk. I kind of want to pull out the pinatas again and talk about fortunate incel, terrible violinist, and human squeak toy, Ben Shapiro.
Yes.
And Rave Dubin, also known as Dave Rubin, and the dissemination of their like completely ridiculous narrative from everything from like everyone's going to have, I don't know, free toilet paper to the compelled speech narrative that Jordan Peterson started, where Ben Shapiro and Dave are just running with that football without any real knowledge of what it means and what it entails. By the way, as far as Jordan Peterson is concerned, I like his lectures, but I don't like his public persona. And I'll just come out right now and say that, you know,
I think we got to get a little bit more reined in here, man. Well, let's pick one of those things and tell me what you want to talk about.
Okay. Well, I know a lot of people who side with Ben Shapiro.
Okay.
Because of his elegant argumentation, which we all know is BS.
Right.
And when we're talking with those types and we're trying to convince them, as I do, that Bernie Sanders is the way forward.
Right.
I guess there's no golden hammer to those arguments because they feel they have it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm trying to get some sort of ammunition in my repertoire where I can kind of shoot it down. And the only thing I can ever do is just say that the Ben Shapiro argumentation on everything he takes, because it doesn't make any sense. But see, that's the thing, right? It doesn't make sense.
Okay.
And so it's easy for them to side with it and to regurgitate it. And it's not logical. So arguing around it is almost impossible.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I think you're mostly right. I think that the best case scenario is, you know, when if you're really debating with somebody who's actually locked into some, you know, Ben Shapiro nonsense, then you're, you know, Sam always says this, you're basically arguing for somebody else who might pick up the argument, right? Like you're kind of, maybe if there's like a third person in the room, but I don't know, man. I would read Ben Burgess's book. I think he does a great job at really outlining logical fallacies and how poorly people argue. But, you know, if somebody's really committed to it, then, you know, you're dealing with a belief system. And we're seeing that in all sorts of factions of politics right now. You know, people have really intense emotions and really fixed beliefs, and then they just repeat.
Exactly.
You know, look at people who support. I mean, there's people, you know, Andrew Yang, he's great. Period. Doesn't matter how many dissections you do. You know, Tulsi Gabbard, great. Doesn't matter how many dissections you do. And then obviously this other stuff we've been talking about. You know, people take it. You know,
Yeah, the
people
scarcity.
take it. Yeah. So I don't really know, but I would just say, read Ben Burgess's book. Give them an argument, logic for the left. Thanks for the call, man. Let's do this sound because I don't want to alarm people, but in the midst of all of these Twitter arguments, there might actually be like a global armed conflict that could come out of South Asia. The situation between Pakistan and India is legitimately terrifying. And that's why Donald Trump is taking a break from his extremely busy schedule to suggest that he might have the answer for how to mediate on Kashmir.
Whether it's arbitration or mediation or whatever it has to be, I'll do whatever I can because they're at very serious odds right now, and hopefully that'll get better. You look at the two gentlemen heading those two countries, two good friends of mine. I said, fellas, work it out. Just work it out. Those are two nuclear countries. They've got to work it out.
Just work it out, fellas. Work it out.
We call that fellas diplomacy.
Wouldn't it be great if that worked?
That would be amazing if that worked. I could see some inroads with Imran Khan in that because Imran Khan's kind of a slightly Trump figure in a way. Former cricket star, very comfortable in the cameras, pretty flexible, kind of a pawn of the Pakistani military who I actually don't think they would be super receptive to the come on fellas. And Narendra Modi is definitely not a come on fellas guy, to say the least. Colorado guy. As a queer person and Sanders supporter, I think Bernie missing all of the LGBTQ forums due to prior plans could easily appear as dismissive to the community. However, Bernie has a 100% voting record on human rights campaign, a well-documented history of clear solidarity in Vermont spanning decades, and he specifically spoke about LGBTQ issues at his recent Denver rally, talking about how the national debates barely touch on LGBTQ issues or how gay acceptance is now in decline in the U.S. seems more productive, folks. Much love, MR Crew, Lula Leveler. So that's, yes, right. That's a totally fair point. But I also liked, Bernie in the last forum, and I remember looking that up. I was like, why the hell is he not going to this? That's stupid. I was like, oh, because he has prior plans to speak at, I believe, a HBC women's college, which was set in, months ago. So that's I guess that's like a good example, right? Like, okay, this is tricky. You need to prioritize getting to one of these forums, even as we acknowledge the reality of the record. But what you see now from most people who just constantly go after and lie about Bernie in this disgusting, relentless ways, they'll just say he wasn't at the forum. They will not acknowledge, you could say, hey, there was a real conflict here, but I still think he should have made it. Fair. What most people are attacking him now are precisely what they would in fact do, is that if he did rearrange his plans, they would then just blare that he canceled at a historically black women's college. And that's, again, I'm just not playing with that. And sorry.
Me neither.
Yeah.
That's not what I was talking about. Again, there are certainly critiques like that and people like that you have to look at and say, I know what you're doing and it's not going to work on me. And then there are people who are just genuinely concerned. Oh, the whole Democratic Party seems to hate him. How's he going to get anything passed in office? And you have to respond to those arguments on the merits.
Sure. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's definitely not what I'm arguing against. Joe from Westford. From the Westford. Michael, love your point on monopolization regarding impeachment. Look no further than the UK, where the past 3 years of political discourse has revolved entirely around Brexit. Yes, that is a concern for me. Jen, Michael, don't take this the wrong way, but I think you need to have your impression of Jeremy Corbyn challenged. He has a Brexit problem. If you can please talk to a YouTuber YouTuber a different bias. He's a school teacher in Policy Walk. He's pretty good at laying things out, I find. Sure, I'll look into it. But, I mean, Jeremy Corbyn's position on Brexit, that he's going to support a second referendum, is, to me, that's the only viable position I see. And I get that Brexit's a disaster and a bad move, but I don't have the same willingness to simply override a democratic mandate like that. And I think the best case you can do is say, look, guys, this is an absolute disaster. Do you want to vote on this again? And also the political calculation he's pulling off. I think there's a lot of focus on the components of Corbyn's coalition that are opposed to Brexit. And in fact, there is a big working class constituency in Labour that he can't risk losing to pro-Brexit parties. So he needs to be very strategic about that. He's playing it well. Okay, YouTube audio is out. Yeah. No. That must be old. I'm sorry. I think we're fine. Sorry.
Yeah, it looks fine to me.
Yeah, I'm sorry about that. I think that must be old. Okay. There were like a ton of YouTube is out questions. You're calling from a 717 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Chris calling from Sheepshead Bay.
Hey, what's going on, Chris? What's on your mind?
Hey, so actually, like, two quick things. The first one is, did you guys, or have you looked at the whole issue going on right now with Elizabeth Warren's daughter and the endorsement from her group to the Working Families
I think that's
Party?
a debunked story.
Yeah, Grimm debunked that.
I think that's debunked. I don't.
Oh, it's been debunked?
I haven't read any of it either way, but if Grimm debunked it, then I trust Grimm.
It just seems like a whole lot of NGO. What?
Hey, what's up? How you doing?
Oh, hey, sorry, yeah, my daughter's awake.
I would like the Working Families Party story to take up less oxygen and for us to talk more about Bernie's policies and why they're better than everyone.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, 100.
It's just a whole lot of NGO inside baseball that is really not that interesting to me.
Huge problem they haven't released their vote totals. That they still absolutely should be doing, and that is a huge problem.
Yeah.
But I think that whole Grimm, this is the Grimm thread. I just also would say...
I got all my information from Jordan. I forget how to pronounce his
I don't
last
know.
name.
I would look at Grimm.
C-H-I-
I don't know. I look at Grimm. I think Grimm debunked it, but I don't know anything about it either way. I didn't read it one way or another.
And the...
Yeah, what's the second one?
Oh, sorry.
No, what's the second question?
The second one was, so while YouTube was out, I was kind of listening to yours and Jamie's argument.
Mm-hmm.
And the impression that I'm getting, I think maybe the argument between you two is, I think, Michael, you're kind of like speaking more from the social media, maybe news perspective of misinformation
100%.
and like how
if you're
like,
speaking to normal
so
people, you
that...
should take Jamie's approach on social media and amongst people. I'm sorry to jump ahead, but I think you're drawing a really smart distinction. I'm not talking about your like nice friend or neighbor who's like, hey, I'm kind of unsure. Be nothing but polite and respectful. I'm saying that like I see people who absolutely know better saying things like,
oh, okay.
Somebody like this, somebody who I actually did a show with once. It was recently. It was like, well, if anything, Wall Street's more scared of Warren. It was like, okay. And I didn't, and by the way, I never attack people personally. I just said, okay, here's literally like, you're a person with influence and you are looked on for expertise. You're saying something that's just demonstrably not true. So maybe you haven't done the research. So I'll go and I'll do Google.
Yeah.
And I will drop you literally 5 articles showing with headlines like Wall Street warms to Warren, third way, never Sanders, but maybe Warren. And so in the social media game and in this space, there's a just awe-inspiring amount of disingenuity about Sanders. And I gotta say, like, the reason that it pisses me off is really frank. Look, I like Bernie Sanders. I think it's, hating Bernie Sanders is weird, but I don't hate Elizabeth Warren, right? And I know her fans, right? Like, I don't actually, in fact, to be honest with you, I hate very few of these people, one way or another. I don't have a big melodrama about these.
They're making policy. It's politics.
Well, yeah, whatever, right. So, but I know people in my life, and I know people in a broader context, that it's like when you're lying about Bernie, you're playing games about that. That's translating to like homelessness, increased budget, military spending, a lack of seriousness about Medicare for all. And that really matters. And if, and I'm, by the way, and I'll draw another distinction. I see a lot of people, a great example of this on the other side is Emma Vigeland, who supports Bernie Sanders and likes Elizabeth Warren much more than I do, right? And she's an incredible reporter and super smart and totally good faith. And I've said multiple times, I see people who are like, well, you having Emma Vigeland on TMBS. She's a shill. That's disgusting. That's stupid. That's delusional. She is never, and she has never once in the she's just said, I really like this Warren thing. And in conversations I've had with her, it's either like, I agree with you. That actually is a good Warren thing. Or actually, I think I have a different concept of power versus corruption than you. Let's have an interesting, progressive, socialist conversation. But what she never does, and by the way, and this distills my frustration. First is that she never predicates her praise of Warren on lies and smears about Bernie and his supporters. That's number one, and that's what a ton of people do. And number two, she accepts, she'll say like, yeah, Elizabeth Warren didn't answer my question about military spending. I get when I'm dealing with people that are gaslighting me, where it's like, on one hand, they're telling me, you can never deal with criticisms of Bernie, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, well, no, actually, here are actual examples of real things that I'm willing to criticize him on, and I have. And I also make no bones about the fact that this is a hugely important election. He's the best candidate, so I'm going to focus on that. But then there'll be the same people that turn around and say, oh, well, talking about Elizabeth Warren's Venezuela position or vote to confirm Ben Carson, that is just unfair. So when I'm dealing with that level of disingenuity and ridiculousness, that I have no tolerance for, and I make no bones about it. I know people get upset by that. I'm sorry. I just can't lie. I can't. I need to be honest. When you're in an interaction with either a brilliant, good faith person like my friend Emma, or somebody, in your normal day-to-day life, and honestly, in general, like I think in general, people should try to frankly be like a little bit more pleasant in social media. But if you're coming and you're pulling bullshit with me, I'm not playing that game. And I don't accept the premise that somehow because it's Bernie, there's like way more latitude to be dishonest about him and his supporters. And in fact, not only do I not accept that, I see that as a direct attack on people that I like literally know personally, who are immigrants, who are people of color, who are people in serious economic circumstances that are like, thank you for advocating. And like, I actually need somebody who's serious about this stuff.
Okay.
So that's it. There's really, and honestly, I don't, and I know you don't, I don't even think you disagree with that, frankly. So,
No, I'm just saying we really need to be sure who we're dealing with before we pull the trigger on that kind of defensiveness. Because, your nice neighbor.
So I agree with you, Jamie,
is probably on social media, and we need to know who we're talking to before we assume bad faith on someone's part. And I would like us to err on the side of caution.
You should never pull the trigger on the first interaction. There's a big difference between, as I said, I think, influencers who should know better. That's brass knuckles out.
Sure.
But then, and I agree with you 100%. The only thing I would add is that, when it's legitimate and responding in the way that we both agree, then that's not defensiveness. That's being clear and honest. Or if it's defensiveness, then Jesus Christ, Elizabeth Warren supporters are insanely defensive. Like, it's either that we're not going to use that word in a pejorative way, or it's just like, sure, everybody's defensive of their candidate. It doesn't mean anything, right?
Yeah, I just think people need to be aware of how they're coming off at all times.
As do Elizabeth Warren, as do Warren supporters.
I've been sitting this out for a long period of time because I'm trying to fix the YouTube stream.
New Jersey Jeeves, you're ruling.
The Jersey ideology hit us.
Yeah.
It's when dealing with these people online and dealing with like surrogates and people who are the most vocal, I can understand the Bernie supporters feeling this for, warm supporters to say, hey, she's the same as him. Like, we know that's not true.
That's a lie.
We know that's not true.
Right.
However, these are the two most progressive candidates on the ballot. And for them to be pointing at each other and saying that they're so demonstrably either like arguing bad faith or whatever, it kind of looks like the Spider-Man meme to onlookers. And I think like a lot of this is going to end up coming down to what happens in Iowa. And I think this is going to be the most ravenous time for these people because of like what lies ahead. And I think for the Bernie supporters, the most important thing is expanding the electorate and like getting those regular people out. And I know it's, an online battle all the time, but Bernie's going to win by getting people who don't show up and polling and things like that. So we got to remain strong on that message and keep that sort of like North Star if Bernie supporters want him to win.
Absolutely.
You are erasing Marianne Williamson, who is my second favorite candidate because of her courage.
We can't be leaving any votes on the table.
Yeah, you can't be leaving any votes on the table. All right. I appreciate the call, man. Thank you. I think that was a super helpful distinction. And
yeah, thank you. And thank you for giving a shout out for Lauren Ashcraft and her show coming up.
I'll be there. Let's make that happen. Take care, man.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, take care.
All right. Let's see. Let's actually play this. Edward Snowden has a book out. He should be pardoned. Some people are extremely like the guy went to save himself personally, frankly, after, and if we can understand that institutions make compromises and nothing is black or white, I think we can certainly accord that to somebody who, at enormous personal cost, exposed the most aggressive domestic spying program imaginable, or an extremely aggressive one. He has a book out. He wants to come to the United States, I believe. Here he is on Democracy Now! I just want to show Edward Snowden solidarity.
This is the reason I think, although this whistleblower is absolutely being mistreated by this White House, and this White House is doing absolutely everything they can to stop this person from communicating what the public needs to know to the public in the meaningful way so that we can evaluate it, I do not think they will succeed. Because in this case, the White House is in isolation and in a meaningful way in opposition to the Congress that feels their prerogatives are being stepped on by this. And that's quite unusual in the context of whistleblowing. Typically, we see all three branches of government align against the whistleblower. In this case, because the at least alleged bad behavior is so bright line clear, and because the White House is trying to deny Congress access to the complaint more so than the public itself, I think there are enough people who will go to bat for whoever this person is that they will end up all right. And that's actually a wonderful thing. It's not enough, and whistleblowers are today and will remain, unfortunately, a vulnerable class until we fix the broader system. But the most alarming part of what we see in the treatment of this person today by the White House is what every White House does. They try to make the conversation not about the allegations. They try to make the conversation about the source of the allegations. They want to talk about the whistleblower rather than the government's own wrongdoing. And we need to have access to the facts, and we need to hear this person out. Because it doesn't matter the provenance of an allegation. What matters is the proof of it. Is what this person is alleging to be true, in fact true? And if it is, what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, and that's an important point, obviously, because a lot of the kind of, under the Trump administration, there's so much more sort of whistleblowers are all of a sudden praised by the certain part of the political, field who were quite willing to criminalize people just exposing NSA wrongdoing before. And of course, on the Trump side of the equation, let's look at Trump. Trump, and before everybody gets all freaked out, benefited from WikiLeaks. I have no comment beyond that about anything else about it. He benefited from WikiLeaks. He praised WikiLeaks when he was running for president. Then they unveiled the most horrifying indictment against Julian Assange, which, even though the Obama administration was very bad on journalism and whistleblowers, they did not go that far. They never unsealed an indictment, literally pressing charges against somebody for doing investigative journalism. And, you know, of course, Chelsea Manning continues to be terrorized under those conditions as well. So, you know, Edward Snowden, I think, is pointing out there this sort of, there's the politics of whistleblowers, and then there's the fact that whistleblowers, whether they're exposing corporate or governmental wrongdoing, need to be protected, period, regardless of where it falls politically. This is Vijay Prashad. This was also on Democracy Now! We talked a lot about, and he was a guest on this show a couple weeks ago. I'd recommend everybody read him. He's the director of the Tricontinental Institute for Social Research. We talked a lot about how boring Trump's UN address was. And there was certainly the extreme xenophobia, the terrorism against refugees and migrants. But it was an incredibly Bush-like speech with the threats about Iran, the extreme positioning around Israel. And Vijay Prashad really outlines the imperial dimension of Donald Trump's speech at the UN General Assembly here.
You know, it was a very chilling speech. Trump attempted to suggest that he was a nationalist, you know, pushing the agenda of so-called patriotism against globalism. That's how Trump tried to define his own politics. Of course, this is quite incoherent. On the one side, Mr. Trump and people like him use the term patriotism or sovereignty to defend their right not to participate in international treaties, such as treaties about climate change, about refugees, and about the Iran nuclear deal. You had Bolsonaro give a very spirited defense of so-called Brazilian sovereignty to allow the Amazon to be exploited. So you had Mr. Trump, for instance, here use this language of sovereignty to remove the United States from its international obligations. On the other side, quite in contradistinction to this, Mr. Trump put forward what can only be described as an imperialist agenda. In other words, there was no consideration for the sovereignty of Iran or Venezuela. In fact, he used language which I was quite shocked by, the term bloodlust, for instance, to describe Iranian foreign policy. So, you know, it wasn't quite patriotism on one side or sovereignty on one side and globalism. It wasn't a principal distinction. In fact, behind the cover of sovereignty, Mr. Trump was saying countries like the United States and Brazil don't have to conform to the climate treaties that have been agreed upon on the international stage. You know, we just had this very powerful climate strike initiated by Greta Thunberg. I think this kind of thing, this kind of attitude about sovereignty was a way of setting that aside. But on the other hand, as I said, incoherently, he lashed out at Iran. And, you know, you've got to understand that the countries of the world are not interested in a war against Iran.
So that's exactly right. And the parallel he's drawing with Bolsonaro is very important because, in fact, even for all the talk against globalism, there is real coordination of these right-wing authoritarian governments across the globe. And, you know, yes, Steve Bannon is kind of a goofball and a self-promoter, but he's been seen in Brazil a lot recently. He's
the Nationalist International.
There is a nationalist. It's a real thing. And the rhetoric of this sovereignty is quite important to interrogate. However, in a place like Brazil, what Lula is saying in prison about the Amazon and protecting Brazil's sovereignty and borders from imperial U.S. intervention, and the fact that he's almost certainly in jail because he would not privatize oil discoveries, is distinct from, you know, Macron is correct on the merits, but you have to understand that when international figures demand that, you know, Brazil do something about the Amazon, that's the opening for Bolsonaro and for all of these thugs to say, well, who are you to tell me what I do? In fact, what's been really funny is to note this neo-fascist Brazilian government using woke anti-imperial rhetoric to defend their Amazon record from people like Macron. So you need to, seriously undermine these arguments with an actual left solidarity populist approach globally. And Lula in prison is the best articulator of that. And I want to just get to this really important thing that just was released in yesterday from Congressman Rahul Grijalva's office. He, along with Deb Haaland and Ro Khanna and so far 13 other co-signers, I will say with the notable admissions so far of AOC and Rashida Tlaib, which is disappointing, hopefully that will be fixed soon, have put out the most comprehensive Brazil set and resolution that's happened so far. They call for a protection of the Amazon rainforest, opposing racism and bigotry, and defending rule of law in Brazil. It talks about the labor rights dimension. It talks about a variety of other key things. I'll quote now from Congressman Grijalva. As a member of Congress, we have a duty to condemn the tragedy that has befallen our Brazilian brothers and sisters under the destructive and racist policies of the Bolsonaro government, said Representative Grijalva, chair of the House Natural Resources Committee. Bolsonaro's failed leadership has brought Brazil to a crisis point. He's curtailed the rights of indigenous communities, openly threatened their right to exist, and is presiding over the unprecedented destruction of the Amazon. This is not the type of regime that the U.S. should support, and I'm proud to stand up for environmental justice, indigenous communities, and the Brazilian people with this resolution. Now, they also talk correctly. The resolution directs the Department of Justice to perform a full review of DOJ activities in Brazil to determine if any DOJ employees or employees supported an unethical conduct by the Lava Jato task force or other Brazilian judicial agents. And it calls on an assistance of U.S. Stopping of U.S. military assistance. Now, recall, Bolsonaro visited CIA headquarters when he visited the United States last year or several months ago. None of this happens without a variety of moves, but the epicenter politically is the political imprisonment of President Lula, who still sits in jail in Curitiba, even after the Lava Jato releases and reporting for The Intercept prove beyond a shadow of doubt that the charges against him are politically motivated and corrupt from the inception. Now, what that shows you, obviously, is that this is a political imprisonment. It's not a judicial imprisonment. It's corrupt and illegitimate. So, of course, he's still in jail because the process is fundamentally illegitimate. And this resolution also calls for Lula's freedom and also talks about a full investigation of the DOJ and Lava Jato. And I will say, point to a recent interview that Lula did for the Asia Times, where he talks about how his strategy for the BRIC countries was to create an alternative world currency, an alternative reserve currency to be used for developing nations, and that he wanted to use the BRICS, which is Brazil, South Africa, China, and Russia, in a creative way to counteract the hegemonic instincts of the United States. And if you look at that in conjunction with his refusal to privatize key strategic Brazilian assets and the history of the United States as an imperial enforcer of Latin America and the Caribbean, you will see the broader imperial designs of his political imprisonment. Again, this is another issue where Lula, you have these great Congress people, Deb Haaland, Rahul Grijalva, Ro Khanna on this issue, and others, Hank Johnson, Ilhan Omar, and then, of course, in the presidential campaign, this is another area that, of course, Bernie has been the only one to speak on. But this is one that, honestly, anybody who has any pretensions to climate concerns and global democracy should be demanding this, because you have a demented lunatic who's even worse than Trump, and then somebody who could be the most effective center-left statesman in the world in prison, who already, in his first 2 terms, lifted 40 million people out of poverty. So thank these Congress people. Thank Senator Sanders, and demand that more and more people take action on this. It's a really big deal in all dimensions.
Deadass. And on the imperialism tip,
Yeah.
Can we just give a shout out real quick to Daniela Rodriguez,
Yes.
diplomat from Venezuela
Talk
who
about it.
sat during Trump's garbage UN speech and read a book on Simone Bolivar for the entire duration. Can I read what she tweeted here? She said, this is the book I read while real Donald Trump desecrated the General Assembly of the ONU with his xenophobic and imperialist speech. Long live Bolivar, long live Venezuela, long live the Venezuelan people who do not bow to any empire. Hashtag hands off Venezuela.
That's awesome.
Queen.
She'll get taken off of Twitter soon.
Probably.
That's awesome. Nothing but respect for that. Trumpy Bear, Warren's a reformist while Sanders is a revolutionary. How is that the same? Also, Marianne is an Oprah shill. Boo. First part true, second part fake news. All love to Marianne.
Gang.
Go off, Brendan.
Thanks.
I will go off. Thank you.
Don't mind if I do.
Don't mind if I do. You're calling from a 773 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hi, this is Gus from Chicago's North Side. I'm
Hey,
the Lula
Gus.
Libre down with Guaido guy.
Hey, nice. What's going on, Gus? What's on your mind?
And not much, just enjoying a nice day here on the North Side, walking my dog. But I wanted to tell you, I've been trying to get on the show for about 2.5 weeks. I actually met my first British Lib Dems, and I got a good story.
Boo. Boo the Lib Dems. They're not good. Very bad for you.
Well,
Tell
that's
me.
you got to listen to the story. This is why it's funny. I was getting petitions for a friend of mine running for judge in the city, and I was at the Logan Squares Farmers Market, which is the last place I want to be on a Sunday. But when got these signatures, and I saw these two people, kind of look like Shaggy and Daphne from Scooby-Doo,
Right.
and they said they were from England, and I said, "Oh, I love Jeremy Corbyn," in a real matter-of-fact way. The young man goes, "We don't."
Ugh.
And the hilarious part is, I didn't say anything because I was shocked at first, but basically I kind of figured out they were Lib Dems because I actually know people that belong to the British Trotskyist Party,
Right.
and those guys actually dress so well they make the Tories look like bums and hippies. But and the Tories usually come to America dressed like American tourists.
Right.
But it was funny because I kept looking at it, and I'm like, those are the first people ever that said they didn't like Jeremy Corbyn. Like every British tourist I met either says they love him or they said in a quiet voice, yes, a bag of leaves is better than anybody, so we'll take Jeremy. But I found it so interesting that these two said so matter-of-factly they didn't like Corbyn. And I'm like, it was like seeing a white tiger without inbreeding. It's like, oh, my God, you exist.
Well, unfortunately, a lot of them exist, so we gotta really pull for Labor over there. That's a big election, and again, I mean, Labor Party. This is actually another thing that's really analogous. I mean, they're putting incredible stuff on the table. That's a really important election. John McDonald, the shadow.
No, it is. It's as important as our election here in the States in 2020.
I don't think it's quite as important just because of the scale, but it's up there. It's up there. Thanks for the call, man.
Yeah.
Appreciate it.
They're promoting the Sam
No
Seder
prob.
work week in the Labor Party.
4-day work week. That's
Hell
right.
yeah.
The Sam Seder method.
I mean, yeah, the problem isn't that Sam has a Sam Cedar work week. It's that is not available to everyone.
The problem is that he goes,
I'm just giving credit to a
Michael's
visionary.
never here. Oh, okay. It's my day, my third day. I'm going to go take that now. All right. Going to the phones. People always ask for this. Let me see how long I can pull it off. You're calling from a 616 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from? Got to be quick.
Yeah. Hi, my name's Ethan. I'm calling from Vancouver.
Hi, Ethan. What's happening?
Hi. Well, I'm calling from the southern Vancouver, not the northern Vancouver. And I was going to give you guys a grab bag of Betsy DeVos stories or white flight. But I think it's kind of important to talk about both of them at once.
Why don't you? Okay,
because of who she is.
Yep.
What was that, Michael?
No, go ahead.
Oh, wait,
Okay,
did you think you
so
were talking
I,
to Sam? Because that's
you didn't
Michael.
think you were thinking. I thought you were. This is Sam.
Oh, I am so
Michael's
sorry.
out again.
My bad. Yeah. Well,
He's
it's
always
Thursday,
not
it's not
here.
Monday, but I
Hello?
figured.
Okay. Yeah.
I
Go
was
ahead.
going to get to talk to Michael.
All right. Yes, sir. Tell me what you have in mind, brother.
Yeah. So I'm from Grand Rapids, Michigan, and went to school with the DeVosses the Van Andels, which was the two families that started Amway and the multi-level marketing scheme pyramid stuff.
Yep.
And during my time there was really given the opportunity to see why they're acting in the way that they're acting. And I think it's important to historicize it. So I'll be very concise. I apologize.
No worries. Go ahead.
Basically, we're talking about a group of people who are beyond tribal.
Right.
It's more of a socioeconomic, religio-ethnic barrier that we're talking about. So the barrier to entry is higher than for most people to be in this part of the, let's say, deciding class.
Right.
And, you know, if you're not white, if you're not Dutch, if you're not specifically a Calvinist, you don't get to be part of the party.
Right.
And she comes from a group of Dutch immigrants that are more connected to, you know, puritanical religio fascists from Europe that came over in the 1800s. And then when they got to America, they had such a hard time branching out from their own tribe that they almost died during a blizzard. They refused to ask for help.
Wow.
And, you know,
It's a shame
there's
they
this
didn't.
sense of, and what was that, Jamie?
I just said it's a shame they didn't. Would have been a fitting end.
You know, unfortunately, the existing indigenous people and the other white settlers in the area they refused to allow them to die because they were their neighbors.
Big mistake.
And, you know, it's an interesting history.
So, all right. So just graph this on. Yeah.
The point is, you know, we're talking about a group of people who are not just individualistic. We're talking about a group of people who believe that they themselves are seeking out a destiny and one that is predestined for them. And so even in the face of their own destruction, they will have faith that that was what was intended to be done. So when you guys are talking accurately about maligning globalists or people who are attacking globalists or Zionists and pointing out that, you know, religion is actually a big deal here. One of the things that complicates Michigan, particularly politics, is that a lot of the thought bubble that these people are in is from not only their social class, not only their religion, not only their ethnicity, but all three at once.
Right.
And they will take the ship down.
I appreciate the call, man. There does need to be a lot more. I think Betsy DeVos and the whole DeVos family, and obviously, Jesus Christ, Eric Prince, it's one of those like terrifying macro studies that could tell you the whole story.
I think.
Yeah.
I appreciate it, man.
I
Thanks.
think
yeah.
I just finished a book on a series of essays by this woman, Megan O'Geeblin, and she was raised evangelical in Michigan in the Midwest. And the narrative that like the religious right is, you know, losing influence in this country, that may or may not be true, but they're not going away, and they're going to like die on that hill.
Well,
and their influence is very outsized to how many of them there are, because of the people whose ears they have.
And I also want to make a sharp distinction between people who are, you know, there's like even just inside the Republican coalition, like there's middle class, you know, white, whatever, who live in areas where literally church is like the only form of social cohesion that exists in deindustrialized America.
Yeah.
I'm not judging. That's why I'm just not interested in being a snob about people's religious stuff. But Certainly people like the DeVos family who have a hyper-fundamentalist exclusionary view of religion grafted onto being oligarchs. That's one of the most potent, dangerous Saudi royal family style. Yeah, that's bad news. That's not, people struggling and finding solace or cohesion in something where none else exists. Which is what my pushback on that rhetoric is sometimes.
But to the degree that any working class people support Trump, I think the evangelical church plays a big role in it, and we should be very critical of that.
Sure, definitely. Attorney Andrew, lots happening on Twitter today, including Warren supporters claiming that the Bernie agenda is quote unquote expecting a pony. Right.
Hillary 2.0.
And this is the other thing. Like, yes, and some people are getting behind. We'll play the just framework comment, but then there's also, it's deeply troubling that Warren's housing plan, which does not have rent control and other key things, is described as reparations. Yes, that's what I was talking about. That's problematic. But when Bernie published his better housing plan, it wasn't called reparations, politics. And in fact, there is a restitution, and some people say reparations for people who suffered home foreclosures, which again, in fact, is disproportionately because of racism did affect black homeowners. So Bernie actually has this incredible part, and as I say, as someone who's literally experienced homelessness and knows people who are dealing with precarious situations, that plan moves me. I saw I won't even name, but some extremely disgusting, Twitter account literally just say that, oh, well, because somebody used the word reparations in that context for people who dealt with foreclosure by the way, a technically correct. I mean, I use the word restitution because I just think that's sort of smarter politics, but it's correct that it is literally reparations. That is what that word would mean in that context. He called it racist and reparations for white people.
Oh, God.
So this is anyway, I'm not trying to keep.
They talked so much about that issue in the Bernie Sanders Racial Justice Forum the other night with Keonga Yamada Taylor, Brianna Joy Gray, and my friend Ariella Thornhill.
They don't exist. We all know that. There's no.
Just three ghosts up there, I guess.
Yeah, definitely. And obviously people like Keonga Taylor, well, they don't exist, or clearly they're not.
Yeah, they really do not like Bree Joy.
Well, that's another thing that I also will see is like, and again, if people want to be remotely consistent about this stuff, the stuff that people say about Nina Turner, Brianna Joy Gray there's no analog to that. There's simply no, and again, the analogs that you could find, I'm talking like, okay, I talked to somebody who's supportive to Warren once, and they said one of the reasons they didn't like Bernie was he reminded them of a landlord. Now, I think we all know what that means.
Wow, guys.
Yeah, but I don't use that example, honestly, because like, it's funny. I mean, and it says something, but that's not a leadership person. So what you have, and this is another part of what's so disgusting, is what you do have is you'll have like, oh, here's somebody with 75 followers saying like, you're a jerk, WFP. And that is headline news. Then somebody who like actually might have a few followers says, Nina Turner's the dumbest person I've ever seen in politics. The Daily Kos person implied that Bernie paid her for sex. So that is fine. That's fine. We can just say in addition to lying about the policies and obscuring the big differences, we can it's open town. And again, it's beyond personalities because it translates to, and this is also why I don't have any time for people who are like, oh, well, you've got to coddle other people's feelings and all of this stuff. When you lie about and you terrorize people working for Bernie, you're not considering the feelings of people who are homeless and don't have health care. And those are my top priorities, guys. I mean, I make no bones about it. That's my top priority. As a foreigner, I'm very invested in Bernie's foreign policy. That's also another top priority for me. And people from the global South, I do that kind of work. They say, really hope you'll consider people outside of the in the periphery. It's more important to me than, a professional class person saying that they don't like the tone of a tweet. Sorry, not sorry. Pajama Boy. Let's see. I feel like if Warren were to drop out at this point, it would only help Biden. What do you see as Bernie's path to victory? I think the only way Warren supporters go to Bernie is by her endorsing him. Well, I think, again, look, if I was on, Meet the Press every day, I would probably just be attacking Biden and talking about how much more electable Bernie is than Biden, making that argument. But in the spaces we're in one of the only small handfuls of spaces. I agree. In a broader electorate, there is actually not a lot of crossover, as Bernie has the working class vote and Warren solidifies the white professional class vote. But inside this bubble we're in of highly informed, highly engaged people, there's people who influence the discourse and people who are choosing between Warren and Sanders. And that's why we need to be clear about the stakes and differences.
And it can't only be the white professional class who's saying they're going to vote for her, right? I know they're overrepresented in these kinds of polls, but there definitely are working class people who support Warren.
I mean, to the extent we say polls mean things in politics, sure. I'm sure there's multimillionaires that support Bernie, but we wouldn't say that makes up his base. In terms of just the actual polls, yes, she is vastly disproportionately that. That's what every single poll says.
Yeah, right then.
But of course, yeah. I would say I know one working person I think would be working class who supports Warren. But no, poll-wise, that's not the story.
There's more of them out there than I thought. They're everywhere.
Let's see. But we're working on that. That's not going to last. Nomad. Protests for Kashmir tomorrow, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. in front of the UN building. I can't make it, but whoever is near or in NYC at that time should go. Yes. All right. We're going to take the final call of the day. Let's see. Final call of the day. Where do we go for the final call of the day? I'm trying to pick randomly because there's so many people. You're calling from an 812 area code. Who are you? Where are you calling from?
Hello?
Hello, 812. Are you there?
I am here.
Hi, what's your name? Where are you calling from?
Hey, this is Chris in Indiana.
Hey, Chris, what's on your mind?
Well, I kind of wanted to start with just the Boris Johnson talk.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we're only going to do one thing. So you want to talk about Boris Johnson? Let's go do it. What do you have on your mind?
Oh, okay. Yeah, it is towards the end of the show. If I could just pick one thing, I guess NPR was airing a story about the Pences earlier today.
About the what? Oh, the
and
Pences.
I didn't know if maybe, just being from Indiana, I felt a little underprepared for some of the information that they were trying to shed. And I didn't know if maybe it wanted another look at how theocratic a Pence administration might end up being.
Didn't we have a guest on who talked about this a couple of months ago?
We had a guy, Michael D'Antonio, who Sam was on a panel with at Politicon last year, wrote a book about the theocracy of Pence, and his entire project is basically to mobilize the religious right again.
Yeah, that would be my impression.
That is the impression that most people get, but they were just kind of going into the details of how much his wife influences directly the policy stances that he made in Indiana and
his mother wife,
his mom wife.
Yeah, for sure. But
all right, man.
Well, they were just trying to get into the details of the progressive side of some of the disputes that he actually ended up taking because of her, and just didn't know if, since the impeachment hearings are actually underway now, we might need to take a closer look at what Trump or Pence presidency might actually look like, even if it was short-lived.
I think it's worth being aware of Mike Pence because he has power, but Trump's not going anywhere. Because, I mean, even if they impeach him in the House, the Senate won't remove him. So, but yeah, I mean, we should be aware of Pence in general because he's a powerful, dangerous figure.
I mean,
thanks for the call, man.
Look, there are people who think that impeachment is going to end with Nancy Pelosi as president. So,
are you actually serious? Or
yeah,
are you joking?
let's.
Oh my, are you serious?
Let's not underestimate the folks out there.
Someone needs to just turn me into like a production robot until the Iowa caucus, please.
Seriously, it's not even that soon.
Oh, yeah. All right, folks, no more calls today. Let's do 2 more quick stories. This is funny. Juan Williams on Fox News said, and this is one of those moments where props to him, but it's like, how is this different than literally any other moment on Fox News since any time any Republican president is in office? But I guess his colleagues did not appreciate the breaking of the fourth wall here.
Oh, yeah, accidentally. They didn't intend it, so I guess it was leaked. But I think, just listening here, I think, boy, those talking points, they've made the rounds because the reality is...
Wait, what does that mean? Whoa. What does that mean? Are you saying that I got talking points? You've got to answer. You've got to answer to the accusation.
You're telling me I was told what to say by the White House?
You had a whole day to talk. You didn't have to... Let's get Katie in. She has something to say that's original.
Better than that. Here we go. Asking a foreign government to investigate a political rival is illegal. Oh. It's illegal. Okay. It's a violation of the Constitution.
Did you get that from Media Matters, Juan?
And the constitutional oath is that
Wow.
Yeah.
They are so triggered and they're such babies because it might even be more true than I thought it was. Now, Roger
Where
Ailes,
there's smoke, there's fire.
Roger Ailes was, the grotesque predator that founded Fox News. He gave very disciplined talking points. He advised the Bush White House. The level of coordination and propaganda there in the Bush era was stunning and deep with Fox News. But I don't know. I'm sure they all have their message of the day. I mean, that's clear because there's uniformity in a lot of the programming. But, and even the sort of subpar idiots like Gutfeld and Waters, you kind of think I don't know, maybe at least they're trusted to wing it, but maybe they're not because they reacted like they're literally reading their iPhones because they're such morons. They can't figure out how to spontaneously lie themselves. The trigger's the tell right there.
Yeah, I mean, backed into a corner like they are, I guess right now because they're really actually working and kind of melting down, just the slightest hairpin trigger really set them off.
That was hilarious.
Countdown to an actual brawl happening on the set.
This is the first Fox clip I saw in a long time. Most of the time at this point, I'm just this is drivel, and not our audience knows what's going on with this.
No, this one was
This
relevant.
one I was like, oh my God.
No, that was
upset.
relevant. They are legit upset. They are babies. Also, I do like not Media Matters. That Juan's could probably hit you back with the Constitution, penal code, case law. These people are such brain dead propagandists that they could only go in their heads to where did you get laws about putting pressure on a foreign government to hurt your political rivals? Where was that? It was from a Media Matters post. It's no, it's the law. That was great. All right, we'll play one more piece of sound. Ronald Reagan tweeted out yesterday, and I'm not sure. I mean, there's a lot of disputes in the polls. My consistent understanding from most polls that I've read is that if you present single payer in a way that is honest, polls well. Now, obviously, if you pose it as there's this new risky scheme that might take away your health insurance, it does not poll as well. What is clear on the merits is that if you want a plan that covers everybody without question and saves millions of people's lives and radically decreases human suffering, it's single payer healthcare. Period. Full stop. That is as close to 2 + 2 = 4 as you're going to get in this business. Now, I happen to disagree with Sam. I'm of the eliminate private care entirely, because to me, it's not just a technical question, it's a political one. I don't want that industry to even have any capital. I don't want them to have the money to regenerate into a future AstroTurf campaign to try to mess with single payer when we have it. I want it gone. I joked the other night, look, maybe you want to do some type of private company that offers like body waxing vacations to Aruba, and that's private. Although frankly, I'm pretty generous. I probably want government to pay for that too.
Hell
But
yeah.
you know what I'm
Nothing's
saying?
too
Yeah.
good for the working class.
That's what I'm saying. Best cigars and infinity pools for everyone. But that's Bastani, right?
Mhm.
But but the key thing is non-duplicate care. Even if you're gonna let some of these private plans, which I would not.
Yeah, Tim Faust compares it to having your house full of termites and then you move the termites with you to a new house.
Right.
Like if you let the private health insurance industry stay alive.
I 100% agree with that. Now, this is coming off of a record-breaking year, which I'm assuming this is like climate change, that each new year is the new record-breaking year. 20,000 people, 20,000 a year in average medical costs. Now, I spent, and this is another reason that I am intense about this and care about this election. I spent a lot of my life without having health insurance. And what's funny is I actually know people. I know a pretty broad set of people. So I know some people who are extremely moneyed, and I see how the system, it works for them in some ways and adds to incredible disproportionate wealth. I know people, and this is the position I'm in now, actually, where they radically overpay for a subpar product. And essentially what they have is, theoretically, if something truly catastrophic happens, they at least have that insurance. But day in and day out, I had to use the emergency room a couple of months ago. It was minor, but I needed to see a ear, nose, and throat specialist. I have insurance now. My copay is insane. And it is something that until the last year or two of my life, I literally could not pay. Literally couldn't pay it. So, and then in fact, funnily enough, and this is one of the only good things in the system, I know some people who are on Medicaid, and they're the ones who get to go to the hospital and take all of the blood work that they need. They're the only people that are like, yeah, I just went to the hospital and had that taken care of. And that's what we need to give to everybody. Period, full stop. Now, in order to do that, and this is why I'm sorry, I'm going to play this Warren clip. And again, I will renew, for those of you who are triggered, I will say what I just said before, using Emma as an example of an amazing person, awesome journalist who does great work, who there's actual disagreements with on some issues and some areas not disagreements with. Although Emma would not spin for what Warren's doing here. And then when you're dealing with normal people in the day-to-day, you know what? Try to be nicer to everybody, normal people in the day-to-day. But if you were out as part of a campaign, part of ideological warfare, part of putting your candidate forward, and you're lying and you're bullshitting about this, I'm not here for it. And if you cannot understand that this is a pure substance criticism and this triggers you, because in fact, you are what you project, you're emotionally fixated on a candidate and unable to hear criticism of them, I got nothing for you. I'll say again, and I'm not going to keep repeating this. I like and respect Elizabeth Warren. She's absolutely not Hillary Clinton. Now, she absolutely is not committed to the fight for single-payer healthcare. That's clear from her long-term record. She wrote unequivocally and bragged about it in the two-income trap that she was not supporting an overhaul of the tax code in healthcare. She said that explicitly. She's prevaricated on multiple occasions. She's done very well in the debates. And then outside of debates, she walks it back. She didn't have a healthcare section of her website until a couple of weeks ago. And the website does not clearly state Medicare for all. And now you're seeing supporters around here talking about it like, oh, well, that's some long-term political project. Not, a life and death matter for millions of human beings that will take a Herculean political effort to have a prayer of passing. And I'm not going to hold hands and bullshit and obscure the differences on that. That's millions of people's lives. If that makes you uncomfortable, you need to step out of your narcissism and think about life and death for people. So I have a problem with this clip in light of that. There's no sound? It's going to be difficult. I don't have any problem with this clip. Still, Elizabeth Warren talking in front of a flag. That's fine. We're going to give you 2 seconds, but
oh man,
she said,
wow, talk about a blue balls of after that setup.
I know. Are we ready? She said right now, and we'll play this, right now in Medicare for All, right now what we've got in Medicare for All in a framework, it doesn't have the details, and you're right to be asking, but the most important part of your asking is to raise awareness so we get this right as we go through it. Guys?
Right now, what we've got in Medicare for All is a framework, and it doesn't have the details, and you're right to be asking. But the most important part of your asking is to raise awareness so we get this right as we go through it. Can we just stop for a minute, though, and say...
Guys, that's a Republican talking point.
That's so bad.
That's a third-way talking point. Pramila Jayapal and Bernie Sanders in the Senate and the House have written exhaustive pieces of legislation that precisely outline through a gradual process of essentially lowering the age of Medicare. I think it's 3 years under Jayapal, 4 years under Sanders, that gradually expands out the governmental programs that already exist to cover every single human being in this country. And there is total transparency that the costs are going to be through a lot of Sanders plans exist on the foundation of the largest wealth tax in the race, something incidentally that he's been talking about since 1997, as well as the fact that, yes, for some people they might pay relatively higher taxes, but overall their costs of living will go down, which incidentally is a smart distinction that Elizabeth Warren has made. Saying that these details are not spelled out and not clear is dishonest. And I'm going to say it's dishonest because Elizabeth Warren is smart. So this is not somebody who doesn't know that. Now, I think that, there's a lot of overemphasis on has a plan and all of this. And, I don't know if blog posts are plans. Sorry. I don't know if they're clear policies, but she absolutely is fluent in policy and incredibly well briefed and incredibly fluent and smart. She knows the answers to these things. So why is she obscuring it? Why are there different answers on Medicare for All depending on the venue she's in? Why, when she's on the Young Turks, she pivots from, yes, I co-sponsored Bernie, but look, the real problem is Republicans don't want people to have health care, and let's talk about access. Maybe for you, you're in a position in life, and actually I would suggest to you, if you go and look at Jamila Michener's research on health and ethnographic studies across the country, in fact, unless you're Jeff Bezos, you're actually not in a position of life where this doesn't threaten you. But maybe you feel relatively comfortable in your health care, and you can afford for this to be an abstract and obscured issue. But millions, tens of millions conservatively cannot. The labor union movement cannot, because even those Cadillac plans that Ryan and Biden lie and try to, gaslight around can be taken away at a moment. Look at what's happening with the GM strikers. They're out striking for the bare minimum. Children are losing cancer-saving medicine right now because a company can use that as a political threat. This is an elemental and foundational issue. And you have two clear pieces of legislation on it. And you have one candidate who has ran on it and talked about it for 40 years. And you have another candidate who I have no doubt will attempt to do something, maybe, that would be better than the status quo, but would still leave a lot of folks vulnerable and is being misleading about policy right now. That's what I'm voting on, and that's what I'm advocating on. And if you find that to be triggering or arrogant or whatever, I'll check in with myself about my patience levels. But you should check in with yourself about your own emotional needs superseding tens of millions of people's lives. This is what Bernie Sanders said about this. GM showed why we need Medicare for all. Your health care should never be in the hands of greedy corporations who can take it away to punish workers, who will guarantee health care for all with no copays, premiums, or deductibles. Bernie Sanders might amass a movement. He might become president. He might put everything on the table for single-payer health care, and it still might fail. That's where we are in this world. Anything short of that is guaranteed to fail. And if it continues to fail, millions of people will die prematurely, suffer unnecessarily, and have their lives fundamentally ruined because we cannot just provide people some fucking health care in this country. And it's disgusting to obscure that, no matter who you are.
Yeah, I totally agree. And this is exactly the kind of substantive critique that we should be making and the kind of comparison that we should be drawing. Because if you've only seen Elizabeth Warren talk about healthcare on, say, the Young Turks, or even in the debate the other night where she seemed like she was fully on board with Medicare for all, you wouldn't see this side of her. And it doesn't reassure me. It doesn't reassure people who are maybe could die because they don't have healthcare, to see a candidate waffling on it at all. Like, we need to be suiting up for war right now. And I totally agree with you.
Absolutely. All right, guys. Compose myself a little bit. J. Cool. Hey, Michael, I agree with your take on Warren 100%. I would add FDR's point about people's making him keep a promise. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't want to keep going over the same grounds, but obviously I agree with you. Trying to find the same. Okay, this is a good final one. Final IM of the day. Can I have my board, Brendan? Ooh. Oh, Jesus. Are we going to have to tell Sam that there's something going on with this? I guess so. It's not playing. My board. Michael laughs at his own jokes. That's a fact. Shout out to workers at Scotty's Pizza in Portland for organizing with the IWW to form the first federally recognized pizza shop union. Shout out. You guys are awesome.
Hell yeah.
Much love to each and every one of you. See you tomorrow.
It might take all the strength I got to get to where I want, but I know somehow I'm gonna get there. I wasn't looking when I just got caught between the truth and the lie bar, but finding out won't make me feel any better. Yeah, I know the clock is ticking, but the meds are gonna kill